Nathaniel Foster dug through the frozen earth, each thrust of the shovel punctuated by his labored breath, visible in the bitter Montana cold. The blizzard howled around him, ice crystals stinging his weathered face like tiny needles. The lantern at his feet cast long shadows across the snow-covered hilltop, illuminating the small wooden box clutched under his arm. He hadn't expected the ground to be this hard. February in Montana wasn't meant for grave digging, but some burdens couldn't wait for spring's thaw. His hands, once steady enough to extract bullets from squirming soldiers on blood-soaked battlefield hospitals, now trembled with cold and something deeper. Regret, perhaps, or fear. When the hole was deep enough, Nathaniel knelt in the snow. He placed the small wooden box, his doctor's box with its brass hinges and his initials carved into the lid, into the dark hollow. Inside lay a folded paper, formulas and measurements written in a doctor's precise hand, stained with what might have been tears. "Forgive me, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice lost in the wind's moan. "I couldn't save you. I couldn't save our Margaret." Nathaniel covered the box with soil and stone, patting it down with hands gone numb. 6 years since the fever took them, yet the wound remained as fresh as the day he'd watched the life leave Eleanor's eyes. Their daughter Margaret already cold in the next room. 6 years since the most talented surgeon in the Potomac Corps had failed the only patients who truly mattered. The trek back to his ranch was arduous, the blizzard growing stronger with each passing hour. Dawn was breaking by the time the silhouette of his home appeared through the curtain of snow, a sturdy two-story structure standing defiant against the wilderness, just as Nathaniel himself had done since abandoning his medical practice in Boston. As he approached his porch, Nathaniel froze. 3 huddled figures lay beneath a threadbare quilt dusted with fresh snow. A woman and 2 children, motionless save for the small puffs of breath visible in the frigid air. The woman's eyes snapped open as his boot creaked on the wooden step, wild, exhausted, defiant all at once. Nathaniel's hand tightened around his coffee mug, almost breaking the handle. He hadn't seen strangers on his land in years, hadn't wanted to. "We'll be gone by sunrise," the woman whispered, her voice cracked from cold or fear or both. "Just needed shelter from the storm." The little girl clutched against her chest, stirred but didn't wake. The boy, perhaps 8 years old, watched Nathaniel with wary eyes. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue from cold. The woman's hands were raw and cracked, her boots worn through at the toes. Nathaniel should send them away. A man alone didn't need complications. But her eyes held something he recognized. Desperation, yes, but also that bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying the world too long without rest. And the children? God, the children were just about the age Margaret would have been. "If they snore," he muttered, turning back toward the door, "I'll have to build a room." He left the door ajar, an invitation without words, and walked inside. Behind him he heard whispers, a child's question, the woman's hesitant response. For several minutes, nothing. Then the creak of footsteps on his porch and 3 shadows crossed his threshold. Nathaniel stood at the stove, back turned, giving them time to adjust. His hands trembled as he set 4 plates on the table. 4. He hadn't used 4 plates in nearly 6 years. "Sit," he said, gruffer than he intended. They sat. The woman kept the little girl on her lap, the boy close at her side. No one spoke as Nathaniel served breakfast. Biscuits, bacon, coffee for the adults, milk for the children. The children ate ravenously, barely pausing to breathe. The woman ate slowly, her gaze flicking between Nathaniel and the door, watchful as a hunted animal. "I'm Rebecca," she said finally, breaking the thick silence. "Rebecca Hayes. These are my children, Joseph and Clara." Nathaniel nodded but offered no introduction of his own. Not yet. "My husband died," Rebecca continued, voice flat as if reciting facts about a stranger. "Railroad accident 6 months ago. Bank took our house. We've been walking for days." "Why here?" Nathaniel asked, his first real question. Rebecca's shoulders stiffened. "Man at the trading post said there was a ranch here, said the owner was—" She hesitated. "Decent." Nathaniel almost smiled at that. Decent, is that what they called a broken man these days? "The barn loft is warm," he said, pushing back from the table. Warmer than the porch anyhow. You can stay there until the storm passes. We'll earn our keep, Rebecca said quickly, standing to gather plates. I can cook, mend, work. Nathaniel watched her efficient movements, organizing his chaotic kitchen as naturally as if it were her own. Her hands were rough, capable, the hands of someone who knew work intimately. I don't need help, he said automatically. Everyone needs help, Mr. Foster, he supplied reluctantly. Nathaniel Foster. The little girl, Clara, finally spoke, her voice small but clear. Is this your house all by yourself? Something caught in Nathaniel's chest. Yes. Don't you get lonely? Rebecca hushed her daughter, but Nathaniel found himself answering honestly. Sometimes, but lonely can be safer. Joseph, the boy, had wandered to the window, staring at the snow-covered fields. You got horses, Mr. Foster? 3. Nathaniel watched the hope bloom on the boy's face, fragile as spring ice. You ride. Pa was teaching me before. His voice trailed off. I could show you the stable, Nathaniel offered, surprising himself. If your mother allows. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded once. As Joseph pulled on his thin coat, Nathaniel noticed the boy wince when fabric brushed against his right arm. You're hurt, he stated, not a question. Just a burn, Joseph said quickly, too quickly. Let me see. Medical instinct surfaced before Nathaniel could suppress it. The boy looked to his mother. Rebecca gave a slight nod, and Joseph reluctantly rolled up his sleeve. The wound wasn't large, but it was angry, a curved mark that Nathaniel recognized immediately as no ordinary burn. How did this happen, he asked, voice careful, neutral. Accident, Joseph and Rebecca answered simultaneously. Nathaniel had seen enough wounds in the war to recognize a lie, and enough injuries from violence to recognize a mark made by a heated rod or whip end. But he said nothing, merely nodded. I have salve in the barn. We'll tend it after you see the horses. As they stepped outside, Clara trailing behind, Nathaniel caught Rebecca watching him with something like fear, something like gratitude. The morning light caught her face, younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 35, with a dignity that poverty hadn't erased. Thank you, she said softly, only for him to hear. Don't thank me yet, Nathaniel replied. Winter's long in Montana. The barn stood solid against the snow, the horses nickering at their approach. Joseph's face transformed at the sight of them, from wary child to enchanted boy in an instant. This is Thunder, Nathaniel introduced the black stallion. The chestnut mare is Penny, and the pinto is Domino. They're beautiful, Joseph breathed, reaching out tentatively to touch Penny's nose. While Joseph explored the stable, Nathaniel retrieved a small jar from a shelf. He motioned for the boy to sit on a hay bale and carefully applied salve to the wound. This will help, he said quietly. It contains yarrow and comfrey. Good for burns. Joseph nodded solemnly. Ma uses herbs too. She knows all kinds. Nathaniel glanced toward Rebecca, who was helping Clara pet Domino's white-patched face. Does she now? She was teaching me, Joseph continued. Before we had to leave, I have a book. He patted his pocket proudly. I write down all the plants I find and what they do. That's a valuable skill, Nathaniel acknowledged, finishing the bandage. As they walked back toward the house, Clara skipping ahead, Nathaniel noticed how Rebecca surveyed the property with a practical eye, noting the wood pile, the smokehouse, the small fenced garden plot buried under snow. I meant what I said, she told him. We won't be charity. I can work. I'm not running a charity, Mrs. Hayes, Nathaniel replied, watching Clara twirl in the snowflakes. But I won't turn children out in a Montana winter either. That evening, after showing them to the barn loft, clean, if sparse, with fresh straw pallets and thick blankets, Nathaniel returned to his empty house. It seemed quieter now, the silence more noticeable after a day of children's voices and a woman's practical questions. He lit a lamp in his bedroom and pulled a wooden chest from beneath his bed. Inside lay his old medical journal, bound in leather that had once been fine but was now cracked with age and disuse. Nathaniel flipped to a blank page and began to write, continuing the one-sided conversation with his dead wife that had sustained him through 6 lonely years. Eleanor, we have guests, a widow and her children. I don't know why I let them stay. Perhaps because the boy is the age our Margaret would have been. Perhaps because I'm tired of ghosts for company. He paused, pen hovering over paper. The boy has an injury, a burn that no accident would cause. I've seen such marks before in the war, on slaves who escaped north, on patients too afraid to name their abusers. The woman, Rebecca, has secrets. But don't we all? In his mind, Eleanor would have encouraged compassion. She always saw the best in people, even when Nathaniel's experience as a doctor showed him humanity at its worst. He closed the journal with a scent and extinguished the lamp. That night, for the first time in years, Nathaniel dreamed not of field hospitals and Eleanor's fever-bright eyes, but of children's laughter and a woman's voice singing a half-remembered lullaby. Morning brought fresh snow and the scent of coffee brewing. For a disoriented moment, Nathaniel thought Eleanor was in the kitchen. Then reality crashed back, and he recalled his visitors. He dressed quickly and descended the stairs to find Rebecca at his stove, Clara setting the table with exaggerated care. "Hope you don't mind," Rebecca said, without turning around. "Seemed the least I could do." "Where's Joseph?" "Checking on the horses. He was up at dawn." A smile ghosted across her face. "He's always loved animals." Nathaniel nodded, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. It was better than his own brew, stronger, richer. "We'll head out once the storm breaks," Rebecca said, watching him carefully. "We've imposed enough." Outside, the wind still howled, snow piling against the windows. They both knew no one would be traveling for days, perhaps weeks. "The nearest town is 30 miles, Nathaniel said instead of answering directly. "Not a journey to make lightly in winter." Clara piped up from the table where she was meticulously arranging forks. "Are we staying, Mama?" Before Rebecca could answer, the door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow in Joseph's excited voice. "Mr. Foster, Domino lets me brush him, and I gave them all fresh hay and—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain, looking between the adults. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Nathaniel found himself saying. "You did just right." He glanced at Rebecca. "There's an old shed attached to the south side of the house. Needs work, but it could be converted. If you're amenable to staying through winter, that is." Rebecca's face showed a complex mix of emotions: relief, wariness, pride. "I told you we won't be charity." "And I believe you." Nathaniel sipped his coffee. "I could use help with the livestock. Spring planting too, when the time comes. The garden's gone fallow these past years." "You're offering us work, then? And lodging in exchange?" Nathaniel nodded. "For the winter, at least. Then we'll see." Later that day, Nathaniel stood in the old storage shed, assessing what would be needed to make it habitable. It had once been a summer kitchen before Eleanor insisted on combining it with the main house. The foundation was solid, the walls sound. With work, it could become a proper room. "It's bigger than I expected," Rebecca commented, stepping through the doorway to join him. "Eleanor, my wife, had grand ideas for it," Nathaniel said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so long speaking it only in the privacy of his journal. "A place for preserving, soap-making." "Your wife," Rebecca repeated softly. "You've been alone a long time." It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel answered anyway. 6 years. Fever took her and our daughter, Margaret." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said. And unlike the hollow sympathies Nathaniel had endured after the funeral, her words carried genuine understanding. The understanding of someone who had also stood at a grave and felt the world collapse. "We'll need lumber," he said, changing the subject, "for proper walls, a floor that doesn't let in drafts." "Joseph and I can help," Rebecca offered. "He's stronger than he looks." As if summoned by his name, Joseph appeared in the doorway, snow-dusting his dark hair. "Is this going to be our room?" he asked, eyes wide as he surveyed the space. "If they snore, I'll build a room," Nathaniel echoed his words from the previous day, a hint of humor in his voice. "Do you snore, young man?" Joseph grinned, the first genuine smile Nathaniel had seen from the boy. "No, sir, but Clara does, like a bear sometimes." "Then I'd best get building," Nathaniel replied, surprising himself with how natural the teasing felt. That afternoon, he showed Joseph how to measure lumber, explaining the importance of precision. "Measure twice, cut once," he instructed, guiding the boy's hands on the ruler. "My pa used to say that," Joseph said quietly. "Before—" He taught you well, Nathaniel offered, not pressing for details the boy wasn't ready to share. From the corner of his eye, Nathaniel noticed Rebecca watching them from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable. When she saw him looking, she quickly turned away, busying herself with something at the stove. That evening, after the children were asleep in the loft, Nathaniel sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey. Rebecca joined him, accepting the drink he offered, though she barely sipped it. Joseph's wound, Nathaniel said quietly. It wasn't an accident. Rebecca stared into the flames, her profile sharp in the firelight. For a long moment, she didn't speak. My husband Daniel wasn't. She struggled to find the words. He changed after the accident. His leg was crushed, and the pain. She took a deeper sip of whiskey. The doctor gave him laudanum for the pain. It made him someone else. Nathaniel knew too well the devastation opiates could bring. He'd seen soldiers become addicted during the war, decent men transformed by pain and the drugs meant to alleviate it. He hurt Joseph? Nathaniel kept his voice neutral, non-judgmental. Once, Rebecca whispered, only once. He was not himself, raving about ghosts, about experiments. When Joseph tried to help him to bed, she shook her head. I threw the laudanum away after that. 2 weeks later, Daniel was dead. And the bank took your home, Nathaniel finished for her. The railroad company denied his pension, said the accident was his fault. Bitterness edged her voice. We had nowhere to go. You have somewhere now, Nathaniel said simply, for as long as you need it. Rebecca finally met his eyes. Why are you helping us? Nathaniel considered the question, looking past her to the daguerreotype on the mantel. Eleanor holding baby Margaret, both smiling into the camera, unaware of the fever that would claim them years later. Because I couldn't save them, he said finally, but maybe I can help you. The next morning, Nathaniel rose early and went to the far corner of his bedroom. Behind a wardrobe stood a door locked and unused for years. He hesitated, then inserted the key that hung around his neck alongside his wedding band. The small room beyond had been his home office, later converted to a sick room where he'd fought desperately to save Eleanor and Margaret. Medical books lined the shelves, instruments laid out with surgical precision on the desk. Bottles of medicine, herbs, and compounds stood in neat rows, a doctor's arsenal against death, one that had ultimately failed him. Nathaniel selected a few items: clean bandages, antiseptic wash, herbal tinctures, and locked the door again. Some ghosts weren't ready to be faced fully, but he could at least use his knowledge to help Joseph's arm heal properly. When he brought the supplies to the barn loft later, Rebecca was combing Clara's hair, the little girl sitting patiently on a trunk that apparently contained their few possessions. For Joseph's arm, Nathaniel explained, setting down the medical supplies. And this? He held out a small jar of salve. For your hands. Rebecca looked surprised but accepted the jar. Her fingers brushed his, rough against rough, both calloused from different kinds of work. You're a doctor, she stated, not asked. Her eyes had fallen on the precise way he'd arranged the supplies, the quality of the instruments. I was, Nathaniel corrected, a lifetime ago. Why did you stop? The question was simple, direct, like Rebecca herself. Nathaniel found he couldn't offer a platitude. I failed the ones who mattered most, he said finally. Seemed reason enough. Before Rebecca could respond, Joseph burst into the loft, eyes bright with excitement. Mr. Foster, there's a fox by the chicken coop. Come quick. The moment broken, Nathaniel followed the boy outside, grateful for the interruption. Some truths were still too raw to examine in daylight. Days melded into a routine as the winter deepened around the isolated ranch. Each morning, Joseph helped with the horses and livestock. Clara shadowed Nathaniel or Rebecca, chattering about the people on the mountain. Imaginary friends, Nathaniel assumed, though sometimes her stories carried unsettling details that made him wonder. Rebecca proved herself invaluable, cooking, mending, organizing the chaotic bachelor household into something resembling a home again. She never mentioned Nathaniel's medical past, but he caught her studying his bookshelves when she thought he wasn't looking. Work on the room progressed slowly but steadily. Nathaniel showed Joseph how to sand wood until it was smooth. Why does it matter? The boy asked once, running his fingers over a plank. No one will see it under the paint. You'll know it's there, Nathaniel replied. Quality isn't about what others see, it's about what you know you've done. Joseph nodded solemnly, continuing his work with renewed purpose. Clara contributed by painting the newly installed walls with a bucket of water and a brush, creating masterpieces that disappeared as they dried. Magic pictures, she called them, explaining elaborate stories about each invisible creation. That's a brave knight, she told Nathaniel one afternoon, pointing to a blank section of wall. And that's his lady. They're sad because they lost their baby. Nathaniel froze, the hammer half raised to strike a nail. What did you say? The knight and lady lost their baby, Clara repeated innocently. But the mountain lady says they'll find new babies to love. Clara, Rebecca called sharply from the doorway, her face pale. Stop bothering Mr. Foster and come help me with supper. The little girl skipped away, unaware of the tension she'd created. Rebecca avoided Nathaniel's questioning gaze. Children imagine things, she said, turning to follow her daughter. Rebecca, Nathaniel's voice stopped her. Who is the mountain lady? For a moment, Rebecca looked genuinely frightened. Just a story, she said finally. Clara has an active imagination. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. Clara's words echoed in his mind, along with the genuine fear he glimpsed in Rebecca's eyes. Around midnight, he lit a lamp and went to check on the livestock, a habit from his early ranching days when wolves had been a problem. As he crossed the yard, a light in the barn loft caught his attention. Moving quietly, he approached and heard Rebecca's voice, soft but intense. We're safe here for now, she was saying. But we need to be careful, Joseph. No more questions about Boston or the judge. But what if he finds us? Joseph's voice trembled. He said he'd never stop looking. He won't find us here. No one will. Nathaniel stepped back, unwilling to eavesdrop further, but troubled by what he'd heard. Boston? A judge? Rebecca Hayes clearly carried more secrets than a widowed seamstress should have. The next morning, Rebecca was unusually quiet, moving efficiently around the kitchen, but avoiding Nathaniel's eyes. Joseph, too, seemed subdued, answering questions with monosyllables. Only Clara maintained her usual cheer, singing as she arranged kindling by the fireplace, a folk song so haunting and familiar that Nathaniel nearly dropped his coffee mug. Where did you learn that song? He asked when she paused for breath. The mountain lady taught me, Clara replied, arranging sticks in a careful pattern. She says it helps babies sleep. Rebecca intervened quickly. Clara has imaginary friends on the hill behind the house, she explained, her tone light but her eyes warning. She's always been fanciful. It was my wife's favorite, Nathaniel said quietly. She sang it to our daughter. An uncomfortable silence fell. Even Clara sensed it. She bumped us, her small hands going still among the kindling. I'm sorry, Rebecca said finally. Perhaps we heard it in town before we came here. Children absorb everything. Nathaniel nodded, though the explanation felt hollow. They hadn't been in the area long enough to learn local songs, and this particular lullaby, had been special to Eleanor, learned from her Scottish grandmother. Later that day, Nathaniel rode to the hilltop grave, needing Eleanor's silent company. The wooden cross he'd erected was nearly covered in snow, but he cleared it carefully, placing a sprig of dried lavender, Eleanor's favorite, at its base. There's something strange happening, he said aloud, his breath misting in the cold air. The little girl, Clara, she sings your song, Eleanor. She speaks of a lady on the mountain, of lost babies. He shook his head. Rebecca Hayes isn't telling me everything. I'm not sure I want to know. Wind whipped across the hilltop, carrying snowflakes that stung his face like tiny accusations. He'd built this ranch as a fortress after Eleanor and Margaret died, a place where grief couldn't follow because there was nothing left to feel. Now these strangers were bringing life back into his carefully constructed isolation, and with it, complications he hadn't anticipated. As Nathaniel turned to leave, something caught his eye. Fresh tracks in the snow, too small for an adult, circling the grave and leading back down the hill toward the ranch. Child's footprints. Heart pounding, he followed the tracks until they disappeared among the rocks and pines. Someone, Clara, had been visiting Eleanor's grave, but how would she even know it was there? When Nathaniel returned to the ranch, he found Rebecca in the storage room they were converting, measuring a space for the small window he'd promised to install. Your daughter, he said without preamble, has been visiting the hilltop. Rebecca's hands stilled on the measuring tape. What? There are child's footprints circling my wife's grave. Fresh ones. That's impossible, Rebecca said, but doubt clouded her face. Clara's been with me all morning, and yesterday she was helping Joseph with the chickens. She couldn't have gone up there alone. Then who? Rebecca shook her head. Perhaps it was an animal, or the wind playing tricks with the snow. But they both knew footprints were footprints, and the wind didn't make such precise patterns. Rebecca, Nathaniel said carefully, I think it's time you told me the truth. All of it. Who are you running from? Before she could answer, Joseph burst into the room, his young face tight with fear. Riders coming, he gasped. 3 of them, from town. Nathaniel moved to the window and saw 3 horses approaching through the snow. Strangers, dressed for winter travel, heading directly for the ranch. Stay here, he told Rebecca and Joseph, his voice leaving no room for argument. I'll handle this. As he stepped onto the porch to meet the unexpected visitors, Nathaniel felt a sense of foreboding. His peaceful isolation was shattering, piece by piece, and he had the distinct impression that whatever Rebecca Hayes was hiding was about to catch up with all of them. The lead rider, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, reined her horse to a stop. Behind her, 2 men, one elderly with a clerical collar, one middle-aged and prosperous-looking, surveyed the property with open curiosity. Mr. Foster, the woman called, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I'm Agatha Sullivan. We haven't been properly introduced, though I believe you visited my general store. Nathaniel inclined his head slightly but didn't invite them to dismount. What brings you out in such weather, Mrs. Sullivan? Community concern, she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. Word has reached town that you've taken in guests, a woman and children, with no proper introduction or chaperone. So that was it. The moral guardians of a town he barely visited had come to investigate impropriety. Nathaniel might have laughed if he hadn't seen the genuine alarm in Rebecca's eyes earlier. My ranch is 30 miles from town, Mrs. Sullivan, he said evenly. What happens here is hardly the town's concern. On the contrary, the middle-aged man interrupted, moving his horse forward. Moral standards apply everywhere in Montana Territory. I'm Edgar Pierce, mayor of Clearwater. And I'm Reverend Thomas Caldwell, the elderly man added. We've come with genuine Christian concern for the woman and children's welfare. And for your soul, of course. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Mrs. Hayes and her children are under my protection as employees and guests. Their welfare is perfectly secure. Mrs. Hayes, is it? Agatha's eyebrows rose. Interesting. We received an inquiry just yesterday about a woman and 2 children traveling west, a most concerned relative searching for them. Nathaniel kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. This then was what Rebecca feared. Not just town gossip, but active pursuit. Many widows with children travel west, he said carefully, seeking fresh starts. Indeed, Mayor Pierce agreed too readily. But this particular inquiry came from a Judge Samuel Winters of Boston, a very influential man, I understand. He described his sister-in-law and her children quite precisely. Behind Nathaniel, the front door opened slightly. He didn't need to turn to know Rebecca was listening. I fail to see how this concerns me, Nathaniel said, deliberately obtuse. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's livestock to tend before the next storm hits. Mr. Foster, Reverend Caldwell's voice was gentler than his companion's. We're not here to make accusations, only to ensure propriety and safety. Perhaps if Mrs. Hayes would speak with us briefly? No need, Rebecca's voice came from behind Nathaniel as she stepped onto the porch. Her face was composed, though Nathaniel noticed her hands trembling slightly before she clasped them together. I'm Rebecca Hayes. These are private property, and you're trespassing. Agatha Sullivan's eyes narrowed. My dear, we're merely concerned for your reputation. A woman alone, living with an unmarried man. My reputation is not your concern, Rebecca replied calmly. Now please leave. Mayor Pierce cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, if you are indeed the woman Judge Winters seeks, there could be legal considerations. The children's guardianship, for instance. A flash of genuine fear crossed Rebecca's face, quickly suppressed. Nathaniel stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by their visitors. I believe Mrs. Hayes has made her wishes clear, he said, his voice dropping to the commanding tone he'd once used in field hospitals. "This conversation is over." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Reverend Caldwell sighed and turned his horse. "We'll be going then. But Mrs. Hayes," he added, his kind eyes belying his words, "the town council meets next week. This matter will be discussed. It would be better if you presented yourself voluntarily." As the three riders departed, Nathaniel turned to Rebecca. Her face had gone ashen. "Samuel Winters," he said quietly, "the man you were running from. Not your husband's death, not bank foreclosure. A judge from Boston." Rebecca's eyes met his, filled with a desperate calculation, whether to continue the lies or finally trust him with the truth. "Not here," she whispered finally, glancing toward the barn where the children were watching anxiously. "Tonight, after they're asleep." Nathaniel nodded once, understanding that whatever Rebecca Hayes was about to reveal would change everything between them, and might threaten the fragile peace they'd begun to build at Foster Ranch. As dusk settled over the ranch, Nathaniel stacked logs in the fireplace, building a blaze to ward off the bone-deep Montana cold. Outside, snow began falling again, thick, heavy flakes that promised another day of isolation. Under different circumstances, he might have welcomed the enforced solitude. Now, with three unexpected guests and town busybodies prying into their arrangement, the isolation felt more like a trap. Rebecca moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing supper with the efficient grace Nathaniel had come to appreciate. The children were subdued, Joseph methodically setting the table, Clara unusually silent as she arranged kindling in the woodbox. They clearly sensed the tension, though Nathaniel had been careful not to discuss the visitors in their presence. Supper was a quiet affair. Afterward, Rebecca helped the children prepare for bed in the barn loft, promising Nathaniel with a meaningful glance that she would return once they were asleep. Left alone, Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of whiskey and seated himself by the fire. His mind turned over the day's revelations. A judge from Boston searching for Rebecca and the children, tracks around Eleanor's grave, Clara's unsettling comments about the mountain lady. He felt as if he were assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The door opened with a blast of cold air, and Rebecca stepped inside. Snow dusted her shawl and hair, giving her an ethereal appearance in the firelight. She removed her shawl, hanging it carefully by the door, and accepted the whiskey Nathaniel offered. "The children are asleep," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Clara still has nightmares sometimes, but Joseph will wake me if necessary." Nathaniel nodded, waiting. Rebecca took a fortifying sip of whiskey, then another before meeting his eyes. "My name is Rebecca Hayes," she began. "That much is true, but I wasn't a seamstress in Rapid City, and Daniel didn't die in a railroad accident." She drew a deep breath. "Daniel was a soldier in the Union Army, 43rd Massachusetts Infantry. He was wounded at Gettysburg, survived, but never fully recovered." Nathaniel tensed at the mention of the war, memories of field hospitals and screaming men threatening to surface. "After the war," Rebecca continued, "he found work as a clerk in Boston. We had a decent life for a while. Joseph was born, then Clara." Her fingers tightened around the glass. "When Clara was 3, Daniel caught influenza. It weakened his lungs, and he died within a week." "And Judge Winters?" Nathaniel prompted when she fell silent. Rebecca's expression hardened. "Samuel Winters married my sister Catherine. He was older, wealthy, influential, everything our parents wanted for her. But behind closed doors," she shook her head, "he was cruel. Catherine died last year in what was called a household accident. She fell down the stairs while Samuel was the only one home." "You didn't believe it was an accident," Nathaniel guessed. "I know it wasn't," Rebecca whispered fiercely. "2 weeks before she died, Catherine came to me with bruises around her throat. She was finally planning to leave him. Then suddenly she was dead, and Samuel was the grieving widower." She took another sip of whiskey, steadying herself. "After the funeral, he began calling on me. Said it was only proper that we marry for Catherine's memory. When I refused, he became insistent. Said he'd always admired me, even before Catherine. Said the children needed a father, a man of standing." "You ran," Nathaniel said simply. Rebecca nodded. "One night he came to our home after too much brandy. He grabbed my arm so hard, it bruised for weeks, said no one refused Samuel Winters. Joseph tried to intervene, and Samuel, her voice caught. He pressed a hot poker against Joseph's arm to teach the boy respect. Nathaniel's hand clenched around his glass. The burn on Joseph's arm. Now he understood. We left that night, Rebecca finished. Took only what we could carry. I had some money saved and Daniel's army pension. We traveled west, changing our names in each town. But Samuel has connections everywhere. I knew it was only a matter of time before he found us. And now he has, Nathaniel said grimly. Or soon will. Yes, Rebecca's voice was hollow with defeat. We'll have to leave again. Tonight, if possible. I won't risk the children. No, the word emerged sharper than Nathaniel intended. It's 20 below out there and another storm coming. You'd never make it. We can't stay, Rebecca insisted. Samuel won't stop. He sees the children as his property now. His right as their uncle and my brother-in-law. He'll use his position, his influence, to take them legally if he must. Why? Nathaniel asked, genuinely perplexed. If he merely wanted to marry you, that's one thing. But this pursuit across the country... Rebecca's eyes dropped to her hands. There's a trust, she admitted. Catherine and I inherited from our grandmother. Catherine's portion passed to her children, or would have, if she'd had any. Instead, it passed to me, with provisions that after my death, it would go to my children. It's a considerable sum, enough to make even a wealthy man like Samuel take notice. And as their guardian, he would control that money until they came of age, Nathaniel concluded. Yes, and Samuel Winters is not a man who relinquishes control of anything or anyone he considers his. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire popping and hissing between them. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. You'll stay, he said firmly, at least until spring. No one travels these mountains in winter and survives. By then, we'll have a plan. We? Rebecca looked up, surprise evident on her face. I'm involved now, Nathaniel said simply, whether I like it or not. The next morning, Nathaniel rose before dawn and saddled Thunder, his black stallion. The temperature had dropped further overnight, the air so cold it burned his lungs with each breath. Taking supplies to the north pasture, he told Rebecca when she questioned his early departure. The cattle need extra feed in this weather. It wasn't entirely a lie, the cattle did need feeding, but his primary purpose lay elsewhere. He needed to visit town, to gauge for himself how serious the threat from Judge Winters might be. Clearwater was little more than a dusty main street with a church, general store, saloon, and cluster of houses. Barely a town at all, but the only civilization within 30 miles of Foster Ranch. In summer, the journey took hours. In deep winter, with snow drifting higher than a horse's belly in places, it took most of the day. The general store, owned by Agatha Sullivan, served as the town's social hub and informal post office. As Nathaniel tied Thunder to the hitching post outside, he steeled himself for the scrutiny he knew awaited. A bell jangled as he entered. The store was warm after his frigid ride, the air heavy with the scent of coffee, tobacco, and wool. 3 women huddled near the stove fell silent at his entrance, their eyes following him with undisguised curiosity. Agatha Sullivan herself stood behind the counter, her iron gray hair arranged in the same severe style as the previous day. She did not smile as Nathaniel approached. Mr. Foster, she acknowledged coolly, an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to town in such weather? Supplies, Nathaniel replied shortly, placing a list on the counter. And information, if you're willing. Information? Agatha's eyebrows rose, though Nathaniel suspected she knew precisely what he was asking. This Judge Winters, he said, keeping his voice low enough that the women by the stove couldn't overhear. What exactly did his message say? Agatha studied him for a moment, then turned to gather items from his list. It was a telegram, she said over her shoulder. Quite proper, inquiring about a woman traveling with 2 children, his sister-in-law and her offspring. Said she was emotionally distraught after her sister's death. Implied the children might be in danger from her instability. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. A clever approach, painting Rebecca as unstable, positioning himself as the concerned relative rather than a predator. And you believe this? He asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Agatha turned back, her arms full of coffee, sugar, and flour. It's not my place to believe or disbelieve, Mr. Foster. I merely pass along official communications. She set the supplies on the counter with unnecessary force. But since you ask, I find it interesting that a woman would flee from family protection to live unchaperoned with a man of questionable reputation. Questionable, Nathaniel repeated, genuinely surprised. He'd had minimal contact with the townspeople over the years, preferring isolation to socializing. What reputation could he possibly have acquired? You abandoned a successful medical practice in Boston, Agatha said, her voice lowering conspiratorially, after your wife and child died under mysterious circumstances. Moved west without explanation. Rarely attend church. Keep to yourself. She shrugged. People talk, Mr. Foster. Nathaniel felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. There was nothing mysterious about their deaths, he said stiffly. They died of typhoid fever, as did many others that season. Of course, Agatha agreed too readily. I'm merely telling you what people say. She named a price for the supplies, higher than usual but not worth arguing over. As Nathaniel counted out coins, the store door opened again, admitting Reverend Caldwell, stomping snow from his boots. Ah, Mr. Foster, the elderly preacher said, genuine warmth in his voice. I hope to speak with you before you return to your ranch. Nathaniel nodded curtly, gathering his supplies. Reverend. Walk with me to the church, Caldwell suggested. Just across the street. It won't take a moment of your time. Reluctantly, Nathaniel agreed. He had questions for the Reverend anyway. Might as well ask them in private rather than under Agatha Sullivan's watchful eye. The small white church stood stark against the winter landscape, its steeple rising hopefully toward a leaden sky. Inside it was humble but well-maintained, with simple wooden pews and unadorned windows. A fire burned in a small stove, providing minimal warmth. You rarely join us for services, Caldwell commented, leading Nathaniel toward the front pew, though you're always welcome. I lost my faith along with my family, Nathaniel replied bluntly. To his surprise, Caldwell merely nodded. Faith is often the first casualty of grief, he said without judgment, but rarely the last. He settled onto the pew with a sigh. Now about Mrs. Hayes and the children. They're under my protection, Nathaniel interrupted firmly, and will remain so. I'm not your enemy in this, Mr. Foster, Caldwell said gently. Nor theirs, but there are complications you should be aware of. Such as? Judge Winters sent more than a telegram. He sent a formal letter to Mayor Pierce, requesting official assistance in locating his vulnerable relatives. Caldwell's emphasis on vulnerable suggested he shared Nathaniel's skepticism. He's offered a substantial reward for information leading to their safe return. How substantial? $500. Nathaniel whistled softly. A small fortune in this part of Montana, enough to tempt even honest men, let alone opportunists like Edgar Pierce. The mayor has already written back confirming their presence here, Caldwell continued. I fear Judge Winters may arrive by spring thaw, if not sooner. Why are you telling me this? Nathaniel asked suspiciously. Yesterday you were part of the delegation questioning their presence. Caldwell's aged face grew solemn. Before I was a minister, Mr. Foster, I was an Army chaplain. 43rd Massachusetts Infantry. Nathaniel stiffened. The same regiment Daniel Hayes had served in. I didn't recognize Mrs. Hayes at first, Caldwell continued, but I knew her husband. Daniel was a good man, one of the few who visited the field hospital regularly to comfort his wounded comrades. He spoke often of his wife waiting at home. You believe her story then? I believe she is not a woman who would abandon family without grave cause, Caldwell said carefully. And I knew Judge Winters by reputation during the war years. He provided certain services to the Army, experimental treatments for wounded soldiers. Not all survived these treatments. Nathaniel felt his blood run cold. What kind of experiments? The kind that would never be approved in a proper Boston hospital, Caldwell said softly. But in wartime, with dying men and desperate commanders, he shook his head. I cannot speak against a respected judge without proof. But I urge caution, Mr. Foster. The man seeking Mrs. Hayes is not merely a concerned relative. As Nathaniel rode back toward the ranch, his mind churned with this new information. Experimental treatments, soldiers who didn't survive. Judge Winters suddenly seemed a far more dangerous adversary than a merely grasping, controlling brother-in-law. The short winter day was already fading toward dusk when Thunder picked his way down the final slope toward Foster Ranch. Through falling snow, Nathaniel could see the golden glow of lamplight from the house windows, a welcoming beacon in the gathering darkness. 3 weeks ago, he would have returned to a cold, dark house. Now Rebecca would have a fire burning and supper warming. Joseph would rush to help with Thunder, eager to prove his growing skill with horses. Clara would demand stories before bed, preferably about the mountain lady who existed only in her imagination, but who had come to seem almost real through her vivid descriptions. The realization hit Nathaniel with unexpected force. They had become a family of sorts, this wounded widow and her children. And he, the broken doctor who had sworn never to care for anyone again, had let them into his life, his heart even, without fully realizing it. As he dismounted in the barn, the door to the loft opened, and Joseph peered down. "Mr. Foster," the boy called, relief evident in his voice. "You're back. Ma was worried with the storm coming." "Just made it," Nathaniel confirmed, removing Thunder's saddle. "The pass will be blocked by morning." Joseph scrambled down the ladder and hurried to help with the horse. His movements were more confident now, a far cry from the frightened boy who'd arrived on Nathaniel's porch weeks earlier. "Your arm healing well?" Nathaniel asked, noting Joseph no longer favored it. "Yes, sir. That salve really helped." Joseph hesitated, then added, "Ma says you used to be a doctor, a real good one." Nathaniel tensed. "I was." "Then why'd you stop? People need doctors." The simple question, delivered with a child's directness, struck deeper than all of Agatha Sullivan's insinuations. Why had he stopped? Because he'd failed Eleanor and Margaret. Doctors failed every day. Because he couldn't bear to face another death. Death was inevitable. Because he was afraid. "It's complicated, Joseph," he said finally. "Sometimes the hardest person to heal is yourself." The boy considered this with surprising maturity. "Is that why we're building the room? To help heal you?" Nathaniel stared at Joseph, momentarily speechless. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Now, let's get Thunder settled and head inside before your mother sends a search party." The house was warm and fragrant, with the scent of rabbit stew, a welcome change from Nathaniel's usual sparse meals. Clara rushed to greet him, chattering about her day with the exuberance only a 6-year-old could muster after hours of confinement indoors. Rebecca moved more sedately from the stove, her eyes questioning. "You were gone longer than expected." "The north pasture needed more attention than I anticipated," Nathaniel replied, the half-truth coming easily. He would tell her about his conversation with Reverend Caldwell, but not with the children present. Later, after Joseph and Clara returned to the loft for the night, Nathaniel recounted his visit to town. Rebecca listened without interruption, her face growing paler as he described the reward offered for information on their whereabouts. $500, she whispered when he finished. "Every person in that town will be watching for us now." "Perhaps," Nathaniel conceded, "but the storm will keep them occupied with their own concerns for a while." He hesitated, then added, "The Reverend mentioned something else, about Judge Winters conducting medical experiments during the war, on soldiers from your husband's regiment." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. "Daniel," she breathed. "Oh God, that's why." "What?" Nathaniel leaned forward, sensing a critical piece of the puzzle. "Rebecca, what did Daniel say?" She rose from her chair, pacing the small room with agitated steps. Near the end, when the laudanum made him confused, Daniel kept talking about the doctor's experiments. "I thought it was the fever talking, or the drug." He'd say, "They put something in us, Becky. Changed us." I never understood. "Changed how?" Nathaniel pressed. "He said he could hear things no one said aloud, see things that weren't there." She stopped pacing, facing Nathaniel with haunted eyes. "I thought it was the injury, the pain, the medication, but what if Samuel really did experiment on those soldiers? What if that's why he wants Joseph and Clara so badly? To study them? To see if whatever he did to their father affected them?" The theory was fantastic, even paranoid, yet something about it resonated with Nathaniel's medical instincts. He'd seen firsthand the military's desperation for advantages during the war, the ethical corners cut in the name of victory. Clara, he said slowly, her imaginary friend on the mountain, the song she shouldn't know, the tracks around Eleanor's grave. Rebecca nodded, tears filling her eyes. She's always known things she shouldn't, seen things that weren't there. I thought she was just sensitive, imaginative, but lately it's getting stronger, more specific. A tear spilled down her cheek. She told me last week that the lady on the mountain says we'll be a family again soon, that the doctor will save us like he couldn't save her. Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. She's never been to Eleanor's grave. I never told her I was a doctor. How could she know? I don't know, Rebecca whispered, but Samuel might, and that terrifies me more than anything. Work on the room accelerated after that conversation, both Nathaniel and Rebecca driven by a new urgency. If Judge Winters was indeed coming, they needed to be prepared, both with a secure place for the family and with a plan for protecting them. The winter deepened around the isolated ranch, temperatures plummeting so low that metal cracked and trees split with sounds like gunshots in the night. Yet within the house, warmth grew, not just from the constantly stoked fire, but from the bonds forming between its inhabitants. Joseph proved to have a natural talent with horses, spending hours in the barn with Nathaniel learning to care for the animals. His curiosity about medicine bloomed as well, especially after discovering Nathaniel's small collection of medical texts. Could I be a doctor someday? He asked one evening, carefully turning pages in Gray's Anatomy. If you study hard, Nathaniel replied, surprised by the boy's interest. It takes years of learning. Would you teach me? Joseph looked up, hope bright in his young face. Ma says you were the best doctor in Boston before I failed my family, Nathaniel finished quietly. Joseph's brow furrowed. Ma says doctors can't save everyone, not even the best ones. She says that's not failing. It's just being human. Nathaniel stared at the boy, once again struck by wisdom beyond his years. Your mother is a remarkable woman. I know, Joseph agreed solemnly. That's why we have to protect her from the judge. Clara, too, found her place in the household, her cheerful presence brightening even the darkest winter days. She appointed herself Nathaniel's assistant, following him around the ranch with solemn importance, helping with tasks that often took twice as long with her involvement, but brought a reluctant smile to his face. Her talk of the mountain lady continued, growing more specific in ways that unsettled both adults. She described Eleanor with unnerving accuracy, the copper hair, the small mole beside her left eye, the way she tilted her head when listening intently. Details Clara couldn't possibly know, yet somehow did. She's sad because the doctor couldn't save her, Clara confided to Nathaniel one afternoon as they collected eggs from the henhouse. But she's not mad at you. She says everybody dies sometime, and at least she didn't die alone. Nathaniel nearly dropped the basket of eggs. Clara, he said carefully, how do you know about the doctor and the lady? Clara looked puzzled by the question. She tells me things, she said simply. When I sleep, or sometimes when I'm just quiet, she shows me pictures in my head. And what does she show you? You, Clara replied, but younger, wearing a white coat with blood on it, and lots of hurt men in a big tent. And her, in a bed, very hot and red, and a little girl who went to sleep and didn't wake up. She tilted her head, studying his face. You were very sad, you still are, but not as much now. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. Clara's words echoed in his mind, along with Rebecca's theory about Judge Winters' experiments. Could the judge have somehow enhanced perception in soldiers like Daniel Hayes? Could such abilities be passed to a child? As a doctor, Nathaniel's rational mind rejected such notions as fantasy. Yet as a man who'd seen the extremes of human suffering and resilience, he couldn't entirely dismiss them. Near dawn, he rose and unlocked the door to his old office, the room he'd avoided for years. Dust lay thick on surfaces, but otherwise it remained exactly as he'd left it the day Eleanor and Margaret died. Medical texts lined the shelves, instruments arranged with surgical precision on the desk. Bottles of medicine, herbs, and compounds stood in neat rows, a doctor's arsenal against death. In the corner stood a small laboratory setup, microscope, glass slides, notebooks filled with observations. Nathaniel had been researching typhoid treatments when the disease struck his own family, testing compounds that might have saved them if he'd discovered them just weeks earlier. He lit a lamp and opened his journal to the last entry, dated the day of Margaret's death. His final documentation of symptoms, treatments attempted, and ultimate failure. The handwriting grew increasingly desperate toward the end. The final words are scrawled, "God help me, I've lost them both." Nathaniel closed the journal, unable to bear rereading his darkest hour. Instead, he turned to another book on the shelf, a slender volume bound in dark leather, unmarked. Inside were his private notes on military medicine, observations from his time as a field surgeon during the war's bloodiest battles. He flipped through pages of surgical techniques, wound treatment protocols, and mortality statistics until he reached a section marked simply "Special Cases." Here, he documented unusual patients, inexplicable recoveries, and troubling deaths, including notes on several soldiers who had been transferred to his field hospital after experimental treatments elsewhere. One name leapt from the page: Private D. Hayes, 43rd Massachusetts. The entry was brief but illuminating. Patient transferred with severe leg wound, previously treated at auxiliary station under Dr. S. Winters. Unusual symptoms beyond expected trauma, extreme sensitivity to light, sound, or shall I in, reports voices and visions. Claims to know details about medical staff not possible given his condition. Fever-induced delirium initially suspected, but symptoms persist despite normal temperature. Blood samples show unknown compound. Patient stabilized, transferred to Boston General Hospital for convalescence. Recommended follow-up study of compound found in bloodstream, potentially hallucinogenic properties. Nathaniel stared at the one, memories flooding back. He'd treated dozens of wounded men each day during the war, most faces blurring together in the chaos. But now he remembered Daniel Hayes, a quiet, serious young man with intelligent eyes who'd mentioned a wife named Rebecca waiting in Boston. The same man who'd lain on a blood-soaked cot, whispering about experiments that changed men from the inside out. At the time, Nathaniel had dismissed it as trauma-induced delusions. Now, with Clara's inexplicable knowledge and Rebecca's fears, he wondered if he'd missed something crucial, something that might now endanger them all. The room, once just a practical solution for housing guests, took on greater significance as winter slowly loosened its grip on the Montana landscape. Nathaniel reinforced the walls, added a second window that could serve as an emergency exit, and built a trap door leading to a small root cellar beneath the house. If Judge Winters came with official authority or hired men, Rebecca and the children would need a secure place, perhaps even a way to escape unseen. Rebecca watched these modifications with understanding in her eyes, but said nothing, merely helping where she could and ensuring the children remained occupied and unaware of the adults' growing anxiety. Spring came reluctantly to the high country, snow melting in patches to reveal mud and the first tentative green shoots. The room was nearly complete, walls finished, floor laid, small stove installed for warmth. Joseph and Clara had already moved their few possessions inside, arranging them with the pride of children who'd gone too long without a stable home. One mild afternoon in early April, Nathaniel was repairing a fence in the south pasture when he spotted a rider approaching from town. The first visitor since the winter storms had blocked the passes. He recognized the elderly figure of Reverend Caldwell, hunched against the brisk wind. Nathaniel set down his tools and waited, tension coiling in his gut. The Reverend wouldn't make such a journey without urgent cause. "Mr. Foster," Caldwell called as he drew near, his aged face grave beneath his hat. "I've come with news you need to hear." "Judge Winters?" Nathaniel guessed. Caldwell nodded, dismounting stiffly. "He arrives on tomorrow's stage from Fort Benton. Mayor Pierce received a telegram yesterday." It was so soon. Nathaniel hadn't expected winters until full spring thaw, perhaps even summer. "The northern passes are barely clear." "He's determined," Caldwell said simply, "and well-connected. The military provided an escort through the worst sections." The military, another unsettling connection to whatever experiments Winters had conducted during the war. "Thank you for the warning," Nathaniel said, already calculating what needed to be done. "I'm in your debt." Caldwell waved away the thanks. I came for another reason as well. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age and travel. This arrived addressed to Daniel Hayes, care of the 43rd Massachusetts Veterans Association. As chaplain, I received such correspondence. Given the circumstances, I thought it best to deliver it personally. Nathaniel accepted the envelope with a puzzled frown. It's addressed to a dead man. Yes, Caldwell agreed. But its contents may concern the living, particularly Mrs. Hayes and the children. It's from another veteran of the 43rd, Corporal James Westfield. He served with Daniel and was also treated by Dr. Winters after Gettysburg. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Did you read it? No, Caldwell shook his head firmly. It's sealed, and I'd not violate the privacy of a fellow veteran. But Westfield mentioned in his accompanying note to me that it contained information about the doctor's special patients that Hayes's family should know. Another piece of the puzzle, perhaps, one that might help them understand why Judge Winters pursued Rebecca and the children so relentlessly across the country. I should return to Boston tomorrow, Caldwell continued. I've been summoned to testify to Mrs. Hayes's character before Judge Winters arrives. I'll do what I can to delay him, but the old man's expression was apologetic. He's a powerful man with the law on his side. As legal uncle to the children, he has certain rights that even I cannot dispute. I understand, Nathaniel said grimly. Again, thank you. After the Reverend departed, Nathaniel rode hard for the ranch, the mysterious letter secure in his pocket. He found Rebecca in the new room, hanging simple muslin curtains on the recently installed windows. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Privately. Rebecca's face paled at his tone, but she nodded, following him to the main house after instructing the children to continue their chores. Judge Winters arrives tomorrow, Nathaniel told her once they were alone. The Reverend just brought word. Rebecca sank into a chair, her hands clutching the edge of the table. So soon, but the passes. He had military escorts, Nathaniel interrupted, which confirms my suspicions that his interest in you and the children goes beyond family obligation or financial control. He withdrew the letter from his pocket, explaining its origins. Rebecca stared at the envelope, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. You think it explains why Samuel wants us so badly? It might, Nathaniel agreed. At the very least, it could provide insight into whatever experiments he conducted during the war, experiments that may have affected Daniel, and through him, possibly the children. Rebecca reached for the letter with trembling fingers, breaking the seal with care. Inside were several pages of cramped handwriting, along with what appeared to be a military photograph showing a group of uniformed men standing before a field hospital tent. She began reading aloud, her voice steadying as she progressed. Dear Daniel, I pray this letter finds you well, though I fear it may not. Of the 12 of us who survived the doctor's treatment at Gettysburg, only 4 remained living at last count. Matthews died by his own hand last winter. Carter in an asylum outside Richmond. Too many gone too young, and all with the same symptoms that plague me still. The voices, the visions, the knowing of things we cannot possibly know. I write because I've learned something that you, of all people, need to understand. The compound Winters administered wasn't meant for us soldiers. We were merely his test subjects for something he'd been developing for years, a means of enhancing perception, creating what he called the perfect intelligence operative. But the true purpose was far more personal. His wife, Catherine's elder sister, was barren. The compound was originally designed to make her fertile, to alter her body's resistance. When that failed, he began experimenting with ways to ensure that any children born to subjects of his treatment would inherit enhanced abilities he could then study and perfect. Daniel, if you've fathered children since your treatment, they may have inherited these enhancements. Winters keeps meticulous records of all former subjects. He will know of your children's existence, and he will want to study them, as he has attempted with the children of others like us. I tell you this at great personal risk. Winters has powerful friends who protect his work, believing it valuable to military intelligence. 3 of our fellow subjects who spoke out have disappeared. I myself am leaving for the Dakota Territory after posting this letter. Protect your family, my friend. The doctor's interest is lifelong and relentless. Your comrade in arms, James Westfield. Rebecca lowered the letter, her face ashen. My God, she whispered. All this time I thought Samuel wanted control of the trust money, but he's been hunting them for experimentation? It explains Clara's abilities, Nathaniel said grimly. Her connection to Eleanor, her knowledge of things she couldn't possibly know. And Joseph? Rebecca's voice cracked with maternal fear. He's always been bright, sensitive, but not like Clara. Different manifestations, perhaps, Nathaniel theorized, his medical mind engaged despite his horror. Or dormant abilities that may emerge later. Either way, Judge Winters clearly believes both children valuable to his research. Rebecca crumpled the letter in her fist. He will never touch them, she vowed, her voice hard as Montana granite. I'll die before I let him experiment on my children. It won't come to that, Nathaniel promised, though in truth he wasn't certain how they could fight a man with both legal authority and powerful military connections. We have until tomorrow to prepare. That evening, the adults maintained a facade of normalcy for the children's benefit, but their conversation over supper was strained, their laughter forced. After Joseph and Clara retired to their new room, the first night they would sleep there, rather than in the barn loft, Rebecca and Nathaniel sat by the fire, developing plans for every contingency they could imagine. If he comes with official papers demanding custody, I'll deny my identity, Rebecca said. Claim to be a distant cousin, perhaps, caring for orphaned relatives. He's seen you before, Nathaniel pointed out. He'll recognize you immediately. Then we'll run, she insisted. There must be somewhere he can't follow. Canada, perhaps, or California. Nathaniel shook his head. Running only confirms guilt. We need to face him directly, challenge whatever legal claim he believes he has. On what grounds? Rebecca demanded, frustration evident in her voice. He's a federal judge with military connections. I'm a widow with no resources beyond your generosity. Nathaniel stared into the fire, an idea forming, dangerous, perhaps even foolhardy, but possibly their only option. Not entirely without resources, he said slowly. I was respected in Boston before Eleanor and Margaret. I had connections, colleagues who would remember me, and I have this. He withdrew from his pocket a small object that gleamed in the firelight. His Army Medical Corps badge, untarnished despite the years. You were in the Army? Rebecca asked, surprised. Chief Surgeon, Potomac Field Hospital Division, Nathaniel confirmed. I treated thousands of wounded men, including soldiers from influential families on both sides. I saw things during that time, procedures authorized by desperate commanders, experiments conducted without proper oversight. I kept records, detailed ones. Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. You're suggesting blackmail? I'm suggesting leverage, Nathaniel corrected. Judge Winters isn't the only one with connections. If he wants a legal battle, we'll give him one, with enough public exposure to make his military patrons very uncomfortable. It was a desperate plan, filled with risk for them all. But as they refined the details late into the night, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Not just the dull purpose of surviving day to day, but the fierce determination to protect those who needed him, to not fail, as he had failed Eleanor and Margaret. As Rebecca finally rose to retire to the loft above the barn, her last night there before moving permanently into the new room with her children, she paused beside Nathaniel's chair. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. Taking such risks for us? We were strangers who appeared on your porch. Nathaniel looked up at her, this woman who had brought life back into his home, his heart. In the firelight, her features were softened, vulnerability visible beneath the strength she maintained for her children. Because sometimes, he said slowly, we're given a second chance to save what matters. Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment. Then, with gentle deliberation, she bent and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. Brief, warm, a promise of something neither was ready to name. Good night, Nathaniel, she whispered, his given name unfamiliar but welcome on her lips. Good night, Rebecca, he replied, watching as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the cold spring night, disappearing toward the barn where her children slept one final time before facing whatever tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Foster Ranch, the kind of pristine Montana morning that belied the storm gathering on their horizon. Nathaniel rose with the sun, his sleep having been fitful at best. Today, Judge Samuel Winters would arrive in Clearwater. Today, the fragile peace they'd built through the long winter might shatter. Nathaniel dressed with unusual care, selecting his one good shirt and the black wool vest he hadn't worn since Eleanor's funeral. From the back of his wardrobe, he retrieved a leather case containing his father's pocket watch and chain, symbols of respectability he would need if they confronted Winters in town. As he descended to the kitchen, the scent of coffee and baking bread greeted him. Rebecca stood at the stove, her movements precise despite the shadows beneath her eyes. She too had dressed carefully, her faded blue dress the best she owned, her hair neatly pinned rather than in its usual practical braid. "The children?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Still sleeping," Rebecca replied, pouring coffee into a mug for him. "I thought it best to let them rest while we make final preparations." They had decided, after much discussion, not to alarm Joseph and Clara with the full truth about Judge Winters' arrival. The children knew only that an important visitor from Boston might come to the ranch, and they were to stay close to home today. "I've packed emergency provisions," Rebecca continued, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly as she sliced bread. "Food, warm clothes, Joseph's medicine book. If we need to leave quickly." Nathaniel nodded, understanding her need to prepare for every possibility. "The root cellar beneath the new room is stocked as well. If there's immediate danger, that's your first refuge." They ate breakfast in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Nathaniel found himself studying Rebecca's face, memorizing the determined set of her jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, the way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. In just a few months, this woman and her children had become more important to him than he'd believed possible after losing Eleanor and Margaret. The thought of losing them now was unbearable. A sound from the doorway broke their reverie, Clara in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "The mountain lady says he's coming today," she announced without preamble. "The bad doctor who hurt Papa." Rebecca's cup clattered against its saucer. "Clara, honey, what are you talking about?" The little girl padded across the kitchen floor and climbed into Nathaniel's lap as naturally as if she'd been doing so her entire life. "The judge man," she clarified, looking up at Nathaniel with solemn eyes. "He wants to take us away and do tests, like he did to Papa. But the mountain lady says you won't let him. You'll protect us because you couldn't protect her." Nathaniel felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. The child's uncanny knowledge, inherited from whatever experiments Judge Winters had conducted on her father, continued to unsettle him. "Yes," he confirmed, his arm automatically circling Clara's small shoulders. "I'll protect you. We both will." Joseph appeared next, fully dressed and remarkably composed for an 8-year-old. "Is today when we fight?" he asked directly, surprising both adults. Rebecca recovered first. "Joseph, we're not fighting anyone. We're simply—" "Ma," the boy interrupted gently, "I heard you talking last night about the judge and the experiments and running away if we have to." He straightened his shoulders. "I'm not afraid. Clara and I understand more than you think." The maturity in his young face nearly broke Nathaniel's heart. Children this age should be concerned with play and learning, not strategies for evading a powerful man who viewed them as research subjects. "We know," Nathaniel acknowledged, respecting Joseph's courage, "and we'll face this together as a family. But your mother and I need you to follow our instructions exactly today, no matter what happens. Can you promise that?" Joseph nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." "Good man." Nathaniel rose, setting Clara gently on her feet. "Now I need to ride to town to assess the situation. Rebecca will stay here with you both. If I'm not back by midday, you know what to do." Rebecca walked him to the door while the children ate breakfast. "Be careful," she murmured, adjusting his collar in a gesture so domestic it made his chest ache. "Samuel is cunning. He'll have anticipated opposition." "I'll return as soon as I can," Nathaniel promised. "Keep the rifle loaded, just in case." As he saddled Thunder, Nathaniel's mind returned to the hidden box he'd buried on the hilltop months ago, the one containing his experimental typhoid treatment. After Rebecca and the children were asleep last night, he'd retrieved it, bringing the formula back to his medical room for the first time in 6 years. If Judge Winters truly possessed the scientific expertise to develop perception-enhancing compounds, perhaps Nathaniel's own research could provide unexpected leverage. At the very least, it demonstrated he understood the ethical complexities of experimental medicine and the consequences of its misuse. The ride to Clearwater took longer than usual, Nathaniel deliberately setting a measured pace to arrive after the morning stage would have delivered its passengers. Better to observe Winters from a distance initially, to gauge his demeanor and whether he'd brought companions. The town appeared unusually animated for a Tuesday morning. Clusters of people gathered on the boardwalk outside the general store, their expressions eager and speculative. News of a federal judge's visit and the substantial reward he offered had clearly spread throughout the small community. Nathaniel tethered Thunder behind the livery stable rather than at the main hitching post, preferring to enter town unobtrusively. He moved along the side streets until he reached the Silver Dollar Saloon, which offered a clear view of both the general store and the town's small hotel. "Bit early for drinking, Doc," commended the bartender as Nathaniel entered. Few in town still called him Doc, but old Pete had supplied Nathaniel with whiskey through his darkest days after Eleanor's death and maintained the habit of addressing him by his former title. "Not here for whiskey, Pete," Nathaniel replied quietly. "Just information. The Boston judge arrived?" Pete nodded, wiping a glass with his perpetually stained cloth. "Came in on the morning stage, fancy luggage and all, got himself the best room at the hotel." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Had company too. Two hard-looking fellas, dressed like businessmen but moving like soldiers, if you catch my meaning." Nathaniel caught his meaning perfectly. Winters had brought muscle disguised as respectability, likely former military men who'd participated in or guarded his wartime experiments. "Any talk of his plans?" Nathaniel asked casually, accepting the coffee Pete offered. "Plenty of talk," Pete confirmed, glancing around the empty saloon before continuing. "Called a town meeting for noon at the church. Says he's seeking information about his missing family members, his dead sister's children and their disturbed mother. Offering that reward to anyone who helps retrieve them." Pete's weathered face showed clear skepticism. "Sounds like horseshit to me. Man doesn't ride all the way from Boston in April mud for family feeling." Nathaniel silently thanked whatever fate had made old Pete a natural cynic. "Any official backing? Papers? Warrants?" "Claims he's got custody documents signed by some Massachusetts judge." Pete shrugged. "Don't mean much out here unless our own circuit judge endorses them, and he ain't due through till June." The bartender gave Nathaniel a shrewd look. "This have anything to do with that family staying out at your place?" Nathaniel neither confirmed nor denied, but his expression must have revealed enough. "Thought so," Pete nodded. "Well, I've fought alongside enough men in the war to know when someone's running from something worth running from. You need anything, information, supplies, even a place to lie low, you come to old Pete, hear?" "I hear," Nathaniel said gratefully, sliding a silver dollar across the bar. "Keep your ears open at that town meeting, would you?" With an hour remaining before the meeting, Nathaniel decided to observe Judge Winters directly. He made his way to the hotel, a two-story clapboard building that passed for luxury in Clearwater. Through the front window, he could see several men gathered in the small lobby, including Mayor Pierce and a distinguished-looking stranger who could only be Winters. Even from a distance, the judge cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered despite his 60-some years, with a full beard streaked with gray and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command. His suit was clearly expensive, his boots polished to a shine despite the journey. Flanking him stood two younger men with the alertness of trained guards, just as Pete had described. As Nathaniel watched, Reverend Caldwell entered the hotel, looking worn from his journey. The old chaplain greeted Winters with formal politeness rather than warmth, confirming his private misgivings about the judge's character. Nathaniel had seen enough. He slipped away before anyone could notice his surveillance, making his way to the telegraph office. He'd decided to send an urgent message to an old colleague in Boston, Dr. Thomas Whitfield, who'd once served on the Army Medical Review Board and might have access to records about Winters' experiments. The telegram was necessarily brief. Urgent, require information on experimental treatments conducted by Judge Samuel Winters during war stop. Any official documentation of procedures performed on 43rd Massachusetts Infantry. Stop reply soonest to Clearwater, Montana Territory stop. Dr. Nathaniel Foster. It was a gamble. The response wouldn't arrive for days, if at all. But establishing an official inquiry might give Winters pause if he knew his past activities were being investigated. As Nathaniel left the telegraph office, a commotion near the general store caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around the stagecoach, which was preparing for its outbound journey. Through the press of bodies, he glimpsed Reverend Caldwell boarding the coach, his expression grim. So the old chaplain was leaving already, despite the town meeting scheduled to begin shortly. Either he'd said his piece to Winters privately, or he'd been dismissed as irrelevant to the judge's plans. Either way, they'd lost a potential ally in town. Nathaniel checked his father's pocket watch. 11:30. Time to return to the ranch and report his findings to Rebecca. They'd need to prepare for Winter's inevitable visit, likely later that day or early tomorrow, once he'd rallied the townspeople to his cause. He retrieved Thunder from behind the livery and mounted quickly, intending to take the back trail out of town to avoid being seen. As he rounded the corner, past the blacksmith shop, however, a voice called his name. "Der Foster! A moment of your time!" Nathaniel turned to find Judge Winters himself standing in the street, flanked by his two associates. Up close, the judge was even more imposing. His eyes cold and assessing beneath bushy brows, his mouth a thin line partially concealed by his well-groomed beard. "Judge Winters," Nathaniel acknowledged coolly, remaining mounted. "I wasn't aware we had business." "Oh, but we do," Winters replied, his Boston accent refined but with an undercurrent of steel. "I believe you're harboring my sister-in-law and her children, my legal wards since their mother's tragic instability following my dear Catherine's death." "I harbor no one," Nathaniel replied evenly. "My ranch hands and their families are employed legally and reside on my property with my full permission." "Ranch hands?" Winter's eyebrow rose skeptically. "I was given to understand Mrs. Rebecca Hayes and her children arrived as destitute travelers some months ago." "Their circumstances have improved," Nathaniel countered, "as circumstances tend to do when honest work is available." Winter stepped closer, one hand resting casually on Thunder's bridle, a subtle assertion of control that made Nathaniel's jaw tighten. "Foster," the judge said quietly, "I admired your surgical innovations during the war. Your techniques saved many lives on the battlefield. It would be a shame to see such a distinguished career end in criminal charges for interfering with a legal guardian's rights." "Threats, Judge Winters?" Nathaniel kept his voice steady despite the anger building within him. "I would have expected more subtlety from a man of your position." "Not threats," Winters corrected smoothly. "Merely an observation of legal realities. I have documentation confirming my guardianship of Joseph and Clara Hayes following their mother's mental breakdown. I have sworn testimonies regarding Rebecca's irrational behavior after her sister's death. I have the law on my side, Doctor." "And I have the truth on mine," Nathaniel replied, "including the truth about your experimental treatments on Union soldiers during the war, treatments that affected Daniel Hayes and now manifest in his children." For the briefest moment, Winter's composed facade cracked, surprise and calculation flashing across his features before his mask of concerned relative returned. "I see Rebecca has been sharing her delusions," he sighed with manufactured sadness. "Further proof of her deteriorating condition, I'm afraid. My medical work during the war was officially sanctioned and has been thoroughly documented. Any unusual interpretations of standard treatments reflect the trauma many veterans unfortunately experienced." Nathaniel leaned down from the saddle, lowering his voice so only Winters could hear. "I know what you did, Judge. I've seen Clara's abilities myself. I treated some of your subjects after Gettysburg. I kept records, detailed ones." Winter's eyes hardened. "Then you understand the scientific significance of these children, their potential value to medical advancement, to the nation's intelligence capabilities." "They're children," Nathaniel hissed, disgust rising in his throat. "Not experiments or assets." "They're the next evolution of my work," Winters countered, his mask slipping further to reveal the zealot beneath. "Imagine it, Foster. Human perception expanded beyond natural limitations. The ability to sense thoughts, to know things beyond rational explanation. The military applications alone justify any ethical flexibility." "You're insane," Nathaniel realized, straightening in the saddle. "And you'll never touch those children." Winter's face hardened. "I'll be at your ranch tomorrow morning, Der Foster, with these gentlemen and whatever assistance the town chooses to provide. I suggest you prepare Rebecca and the children for the transition to my custody. It will be easier for everyone. He released Thunder's bridle, stepping back with a courteous nod that belied the threat in his words. Until tomorrow, then. Nathaniel didn't respond, instead urging Thunder into a canter that quickly became a gallop once they cleared the town limits. They needed to prepare, and quickly. Judge Winters had shown his hand more clearly than expected. His interest in the children was never familial or financial, but purely scientific, and his willingness to pursue them across the country spoke to an obsession that wouldn't be easily thwarted. The sun was directly overhead when Nathaniel thundered into the ranch yard. Rebecca emerged from the house immediately, her face taut with worry. "He's here?" she asked, helping Nathaniel unsaddle the winded Thunder. "In town," Nathaniel confirmed grimly, "but he'll come tomorrow with reinforcements. We need to be ready tonight." Inside, over a hastily prepared lunch that none of them ate much of, Nathaniel recounted his encounter with Winters. Joseph listened with solemn attention, while Clara played quietly with her doll in the corner, occasionally adding unsettling comments that suggested she already knew much of what Nathaniel was sharing. "He wants our brains," she announced during a pause in the conversation, not looking up from her doll, "to see how they're different. The mountain lady says he cut open soldiers' heads when they died, to look inside." Rebecca paled, reaching instinctively for Joseph's hand across the table. "Clara, honey, who told you that?" "The lady," Clara replied matter-of-factly. "She says Judge Winters did bad things to help the army, but they weren't really to help. They were because he likes to see inside people." Nathaniel and Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances. If Clara's perception was accurate, and increasingly he believed it was, then Winters was not merely an unethical scientist, but potentially something far more dangerous. "We need to leave," Rebecca decided, her voice shaking slightly. "Tonight, under cover of darkness. We can take the mountain pass to the next valley. There's a railroad station in Silver Creek. We could be in Canada before he realizes we're gone." "He'll have men watching the trails," Nathaniel cautioned. Those two with him in town weren't ordinary associates. They moved like military men, probably from whatever unit supported his wartime experiments. They'll know how to track and intercept. "Then what do you suggest?" Rebecca demanded, fear sharpening her tone. "We can't fight a federal judge and armed men." "Not directly," Nathaniel agreed, "but we can ensure that any confrontation happens on our terms, with witnesses present. Witnesses Winters can't control or intimidate." He outlined his plan, risky and dependent on precise timing, but potentially effective. They would invite specific townspeople to the ranch that evening, under the pretense of a belated celebration for the room's completion. Old Pete from the saloon, who'd already shown his support, the blacksmith whose sister had married a Hayes from Massachusetts years ago, the school teacher who'd expressed interest in meeting Rebecca after hearing of her literacy efforts with local children. With neutral witnesses present, Nathaniel explained, Winters will be forced to maintain his public persona, the concerned guardian rather than the obsessed scientist. It gives us room to negotiate, to challenge his legal claims in front of people who matter in this community. "And if he refuses to negotiate," Rebecca asked quietly, "if he simply presents his papers and demands immediate custody?" "Then we implement the contingency plan," Nathaniel said, his expression grave. "You and the children use the root cellar passage while I delay them. Old Pete has a wagon prepared behind the livery stable with supplies for the journey to Silver Creek." Joseph, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "I don't want to run anymore," he said, his young voice surprisingly steady. "This is our home now. We should fight for it." Clara nodded vigorously in agreement, abandoning her doll to climb into Rebecca's lap. "The mountain lady says this is where we belong. With Dr. Nathaniel." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she smoothed Clara's hair. "I want that too, sweetheart. More than anything. But sometimes, to protect the people we love, we have to make hard choices. We've been running for months," Joseph persisted. "If we run again, we'll never stop. Judge Winters will keep finding us, keep chasing us. We have to end it here." Out of the mouths of babes, Nathaniel thought, not for the first time since this remarkable family had entered his life. Joseph, at 8 years old, understood a fundamental truth that many adults never grasped. Sometimes running from a problem only ensured it would pursue you forever. "You're right, Joseph," Nathaniel acknowledged. which is why our primary plan involves standing our ground. But prudence demands we prepare for all possibilities. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca prepared food for the evening's gathering, while Nathaniel rode to deliver personal invitations to the selected townspeople. Joseph and Clara cleaned the newly completed room, arranging their few possessions with pride, as if defying the universe to separate them from this home they'd helped build. By dusk, the ranch was transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch posts, casting a warm glow across the yard. The new room stood open for inspection, its simple furnishings arranged with care, the small window Clara had insisted on facing east to catch the morning dreams, letting in the last rays of sunset. Rebecca had dressed the children in their best clothes. Joseph in a shirt Nathaniel had outgrown, and Rebecca had altered. Clara in a dress made from flour sacks that somehow looked charming, rather than impoverished through Rebecca's skilled needlework. Rebecca herself wore her blue dress again, with Eleanor's shawl that Nathaniel had hesitantly offered from a trunk of preserved belongings. "You look beautiful," Nathaniel told her quietly as they stood on the porch awaiting their guests. "Like you belong here." Rebecca's eyes met his, vulnerability and determination mingling in their depths. "I feel like I belong here," she admitted. "More than I've felt like I belonged anywhere since Daniel died." Before Nathaniel could respond, the sound of approaching horses announced their first guests, old Pete and the blacksmith, arriving together on a wagon loaded with what appeared to be celebratory provisions, but likely concealed emergency supplies as well. "Evening, Doc," Pete called cheerfully, as if this were truly just a social gathering. "Hope you don't mind, but I brought along my special reserve whiskey, figured the occasion warranted it." More guests arrived in quick succession, the school teacher and her husband, two ranching families from neighboring properties, and most surprisingly, Agatha Sullivan herself, looking uncomfortably formal in a dark dress that had likely been fashionable a decade earlier. "Mrs. Sullivan," Nathaniel greeted her with carefully concealed surprise. "I hadn't expected the pleasure. Reverend Caldwell suggested I might benefit from seeing Mrs. Hayes in her domestic environment," Agatha replied stiffly, before forming final judgments. So the old chaplain had done what he could before departing, attempting to soften Agatha's opposition by appealing to her curiosity. It wasn't much, but any crack in the town's support for Winters could prove valuable. The gathering began awkwardly, as such forced social occasions often do, but gradually warmed as old Pete's whiskey loosened tongues and Rebecca's cooking impressed even Agatha. Joseph proudly showed the men how he'd helped install the window frames, while Clara charmed the women with her magic pictures painted with water on the newly whitewashed walls. Nathaniel found himself drawn into conversation with the blacksmith, who had questions about the medical uses of certain herbs Joseph had apparently been collecting and drying in the barn. "Boy's got a real talent," the burly man commented. "Identified a plant that cleared up my daughter's rash when nothing else worked. Told me exactly how to prepare it too, like he'd done it 100 times. Nathaniel hadn't known about Joseph's budding practice, but felt a surge of pride nonetheless. "He's a remarkable boy," he agreed. "Both children are. Rebecca has raised them well despite difficult circumstances." "Heard about those circumstances," the blacksmith said, lowering his voice. "This Boston judge who's come looking for them, he legitimate? Because I knew a Hayes in the 43rd during the war, and he never mentioned no rich judge's family." "The legal claim may appear sound on paper," Nathaniel replied carefully, "but the motivation behind it is concerning. Judge Winter's interest in the children is not what a guardian should be." The blacksmith's weathered face hardened. "Thought as much. Man doesn't travel this far in April mud for family feeling." He echoed Pete's earlier sentiment almost exactly. "If it comes to trouble, Doc, you got more friends in town than you might think. Not all of us trust fancy Easterners with their papers and rewards." The evening progressed more successfully than Nathaniel had dared hope. By the time their guests departed, several had made their support clear, however discreetly. Even Agatha Sullivan had thawed slightly, particularly after observing Clara's sweet nature and Rebecca's obvious devotion to her children. "I make no promises, Mr. Foster," she said as she prepared to leave, "but I will consider what I've seen here tonight when Judge Winters presents his case tomorrow." It wasn't a declaration of allegiance, but from Clearwater's most influential woman, It represented significant progress. After the last guest had gone and the children were tucked into their beds in the new room, Nathaniel and Rebecca sat by the dying fire, reviewing the evening's developments. "We've made allies," Rebecca acknowledged, her voice cautiously hopeful. "But will it be enough? Samuel has legal documents, military connections, and a reputation to protect," Nathaniel reminded her. "The respectable judge can't afford to show his true nature before witnesses. It gives us leverage." Rebecca reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from work, a far cry from Eleanor's soft, patrician hands, yet somehow perfectly suited to him now. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I want you to know what these months have meant to me, to us." She glanced toward the new room where her children slept. "You've given us more than shelter, Nathaniel. You've given us a home, a family." Nathaniel's throat tightened with emotion. "You've given me the same," he admitted, his voice rough. "After Eleanor and Margaret, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to care again," Rebecca finished when he faltered. "To live again," he corrected. "That's what you and the children have done, Rebecca. You've brought me back to life." The silence between them hummed with unspoken feelings, with possibilities neither had dared fully acknowledge until this moment of crisis forced honesty to the surface. Rebecca rose from her chair, still holding his hand, and drew him to his feet. They stood close, sharing breath, sharing warmth. "If this is our last night of peace," she whispered, "I don't want to spend it alone." Nathaniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he looked down at her upturned face, seeing in her eyes the same longing, the same fragile hope he felt himself. "Rebecca," he began, but she stopped him with gentle fingers against his lips. "No promises," she said. "No declarations. Just tonight. Just us." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with growing passion as 6 years of grief and loneliness melted away beneath her touch. Later, in the darkness of his bedroom, they found comfort in connection that transcended mere physical release, a joining of two damaged souls who had somehow, against all odds, found healing in each other. Dawn arrived too soon, pale light filtering through the curtains to find them still entwined. Nathaniel woke first, watching Rebecca sleep, her features softened in repose. Her dark hair spilled across his pillow. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a future where mornings like this were commonplace, where Rebecca and the children were truly his family, where the shadow of Samuel Winters no longer darkened their lives. Then reality intruded with the distant sound of horses approaching. Many horses. Nathaniel slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Rebecca as he dressed hurriedly. At the window, he confirmed his fears. A party of at least 8 riders approaching the ranch, Judge Winters' distinctive figure at their head. "Rebecca," he called urgently. "They're coming," earlier than expected. She woke instantly, years of vigilance making her alert despite the early hour. Without wasted words, she dressed and hurried to wake the children while Nathaniel prepared to meet their unwelcome visitors. On the porch, rifle in hand, though not overtly threatening, Nathaniel counted the approaching party. Judge Winters and his 2 military associates. Mayor Pierce and a man Nathaniel recognized as the town deputy. 3 other men he didn't know, hired guns perhaps, or simply townspeople lured by the promise of reward money. Conspicuously absent was Agatha Sullivan, whose presence would have lent local legitimacy to Winters' claim. A small victory, perhaps. Uncle Foster to Winters called as the party reined in before the house. "I trust you are prepared for our discussion this morning." "Judge Winters," Nathaniel acknowledged coldly. "I didn't expect such an extensive entourage for a simple family matter." "Precautionary," Winters replied smoothly. "When dealing with a potentially unstable woman and children who may have inherited her condition, prudence suggests adequate support." Rebecca emerged from the house then, Joseph and Clara by close behind her. They made a striking picture on the porch, a family united, dignity evident in their posture despite the obvious power imbalance. "Rebecca," Winters greeted her with false warmth. "How well you look, my dear. Catherine would be pleased to see you've maintained yourself despite your challenging circumstances." "Samuel," Rebecca replied, her voice steady, though Nathaniel saw her hands trembling slightly. "You've come a long way to be disappointed." The children and I are not returning to Boston with you." Winters sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. "I'm afraid the law disagrees, my dear." He removed a folded document from his coat pocket. "This court order grants me full guardianship of Joseph and Clara Hayes following their mother's demonstrated instability. Sheriff," he turned to the deputy, "please assist Mrs. Hayes and the children in gathering their belongings." The deputy hesitated, glancing between Winters and Nathaniel. "Sir, I ain't actually a sheriff, just a deputy, and this here's Montana territory, not Massachusetts. That paper don't hold much weight without our circuit judge's approval." "Perhaps this will add weight," Winters said coldly, producing another document. "A federal warrant for Rebecca Hayes' arrest on charges of kidnapping and crossing state lines with minor children in violation of a legal guardianship order." Rebecca gasped, her face paling. Federal charges changed everything. Even sympathetic locals couldn't interfere with federal jurisdiction. Nathaniel stepped forward, positioning himself between Rebecca and the mounted men. "Those charges are baseless, as I suspect you well know, Judge. Rebecca is the children's mother and natural guardian. Any documents suggesting otherwise were obtained through deception or manipulation." "Strong accusations, Doctor," Winters replied, his tone hardening. "Perhaps you'd prefer to discuss your own legal vulnerabilities. Harboring a fugitive, obstruction of justice, interference with a federal officer. I believe the territorial prison at Deer Lodge is quite unpleasant this time of year." The standoff might have escalated further had not the sound of additional horses interrupted the confrontation. Turning, Nathaniel was surprised to see old Pete, the blacksmith, and several other men from town approaching rapidly, Agatha Sullivan improbably riding in their midst. "Appears we got ourselves a situation," old Pete announced cheerfully as the new arrivals formed a loose semicircle behind Nathaniel's position. "Heard tell of a federal warrant being served without proper territorial endorsement. Thought we might observe, being concerned citizens and all." Winter's face darkened with barely suppressed fury. "This is a legal matter, not a public spectacle. I suggest you all return to your homes before you find yourselves charged with interfering in federal business." "Oh, we're not interfering," Agatha Sullivan spoke up, her prim voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Merely ensuring that proper procedure is followed. Montana territory has specific protocols for executing out-of-jurisdiction warrants, particularly those involving children." Nathaniel could have kissed the formidable woman. Somehow overnight she had transformed from potential adversary to unexpected ally. Clara, who had been watching the proceedings with unnatural calm, suddenly stepped forward. "The mountain lady says you hurt my papa," she announced, her child's voice clear and accusatory as she pointed directly at Judge Winters. "You put medicine in his blood to make him hear thoughts, and now you want to cut open our heads to see our brains." A shocked murmur ran through both groups of observers. Winters' face flushed, then paled. "The child is clearly disturbed," he said quickly. "Further evidence of Rebecca's inability to provide proper care. These delusions ain't delusions, are they, Judge?" The new voice came from the edge of the gathering. An unfamiliar man on a trail-worn horse, his face weathered beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg, and approached the gathering. "James Westfield," the stranger introduced himself. "Corporal, 43rd Massachusetts Infantry. One of your special patients from Gettysburg, Judge Winters." Winters visibly recoiled. "Westfield, I was informed you had died in the Dakota Territory." "Nearly did," Westfield confirmed grimly. "Your men were thorough, but it seems the abilities your treatments gave me included a certain intuition about danger. I've been tracking you since you left Boston, knowing you'd lead me to Daniel's family eventually." He turned to Rebecca. "Ma'am, I served with your husband. He was a good man. I tried to warn him about the judge's interest in any children he might father." "Your letter arrived," Rebecca confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "But too late to save Daniel." Westfield nodded sadly, then addressed the gathered townspeople. "Judge Samuel Winters conducted unauthorized experiments on wounded soldiers during the war. He administered compounds designed to enhance perception, to create what he called the perfect intelligence operative. Some died immediately. Others, like Daniel Hayes and myself, survived but with permanent alterations to our perception. We hear thoughts not spoken aloud, see things that aren't physically present. Preposterous, Winters scoffed, but his expression had grown increasingly alarmed. This man is clearly delusional. Then how do I know you keep a silver pocket knife with 3 blades in your left vest pocket, Westfield challenged? Or that the shorter of your 2 companions is named Miller and is carrying a derringer in his right boot? Or that you've got a letter in your saddlebag from General Howard authorizing acquisition of research subjects, a letter signed 2 weeks ago in Washington? Each revelation struck Winters like a physical blow, his composure crumbling as Westfield revealed information he couldn't possibly have known through ordinary means. The blacksmith spoke up, addressing Westfield. You saying the judge experimented on soldiers? On purpose? With full knowledge of certain military officials who believed his work could give Union intelligence an advantage, Westfield confirmed. When the war ended, those same officials helped conceal what he'd done. But Judge Winters never stopped his research. He tracked down the surviving subjects, studied our conditions. And when he discovered that our unusual abilities could be inherited by our children, he began hunting the children, Nathaniel finished, understanding finally complete. Not for their inheritance money, but for their inherited abilities. Daniel's children would be particularly valuable, Westfield added grimly. His response to the treatment was stronger than most. If his children inherited even a fraction of that sensitivity, they'd be perfect research subjects, Rebecca said, her voice breaking as she pulled Joseph and Clara closer to her sides. Agatha Sullivan turned to Judge Winters, her expression reflecting the horror and disgust now evident on most faces in the gathering. Is this true, Judge? She demanded. Have you come all this way not to reunite a family, but to experiment on children? These accusations are absurd, Winters blustered, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. This man is clearly unstable, his claims without merit or evidence. I have evidence, Nathaniel spoke up. Medical records from my time as an Army surgeon, documenting unusual symptoms in soldiers transferred from auxiliary stations under Dr. Winters' supervision. And this, he withdrew. Nathaniel withdrew a small journal from his coat pocket. My personal medical observations of Clara Hayes during her time at my ranch, documented instances of knowledge she could not possibly possess through ordinary means, information about my deceased wife that was never shared with Ire, details about the ranch's history that occurred before her birth. He turned to address the gathered townspeople directly. As a doctor, I was skeptical at first. I attributed Clara's unusual knowledge to coincidence, to a child's imagination. But the pattern became undeniable. She possesses perception beyond normal human capacity, perception that matches exactly what Corporal Westfield has described as the result of Judge Winters' experiments. Judge Winters' composure was rapidly deteriorating, his face mottled with rage and fear as his carefully constructed facade crumbled. You understand nothing, he snarled, abandoning pretense. My work transcends ordinary morality. These children represent the next evolution of human capacity, abilities that could transform intelligence gathering, military operations, even the fundamental nature of human communication. His voice took on a fanatical edge. The potential applications are limitless. What are the temporary discomforts of a few subjects compared to such advancement? Discomforts? Westfield barked a bitter laugh. Is that what you call it when Matthews blew his brains out because he couldn't silence the voices? Or when Carter clawed his own eyes out in that Richmond asylum, screaming that he couldn't stop seeing horrors that weren't there? The gathered townspeople muttered in horrified disgust. Even Winters' companions shifted uncomfortably at this graphic evidence of their employer's callousness. Mayor Pierce, clearly sensing which way the wind was blowing, carefully distanced his horse from Winters. Judge, perhaps we should discuss this matter further in town with proper legal consultation. There's nothing to discuss, Winters snapped. He turned to his military associates. Miller, Thompson, secure the children, use force if necessary. The 2 men exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier confidence wavering in the face of public exposure. After a moment's hesitation, Thompson shook his head. No, sir, he said quietly. Not like this. Not against children with half the town watching. Cowards, Winters snarled. With surprising speed for a man his age, he drew a pistol from beneath his coat and aimed it directly at Rebecca. The children come with me now, or their mother dies where she stands. Everything happened at once. Rebecca thrust the children behind her. Nathaniel lunged forward. The townspeople scattered for cover, and Judge Winter's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot that rang out across the ranch yard didn't come from Winter's pistol, however. It came from little Clara, who had somehow produced a small derringer, a lady's gun that must have belonged to Rebecca, and fired it with unerring accuracy at Judge Winter's right shoulder. The judge howled in pain and outrage, his own weapon discharging harmlessly into the dirt as he clutched his wounded arm. His horse reared in panic, nearly unseating him before he managed to regain control with his uninjured arm. "Clara!" Rebecca gasped, reaching for the smoking gun in her daughter's small hand. "Where did you—" "The mountain lady showed me where Mama kept it," Clara explained calmly. "She told me exactly when to shoot and where, so it would hurt him but not kill him." The eerie precision of a 6-year-old girl, guided by an unseen presence to perform an impossible shot, silenced everyone for a long moment. Even Judge Winters, blood seeping through his fingers where he clutched his wounded shoulder, stared at Clara with a mixture of pain, fear, and scientific fascination. "You see," he managed through gritted teeth, "extraordinary abilities, beyond normal human capacity. The child proves my point even as she attacks me." "The child proves you're dangerous," Nathaniel countered, stepping forward to take the derringer gently from Clara's unresisting fingers. "And that these abilities you've cultivated through your experiments are beyond your control." He passed the weapon to Rebecca, who secured it in her skirt pocket. Agatha Sullivan, who had maintained her seat on her horse throughout the chaos, spoke with unexpected authority. "Deputy Williams, I believe a citizen's arrest is in order. Judge Winters has attempted murder before witnesses and has essentially confessed to performing illegal medical experiments." "Now wait just a minute," Mayor Pierce protested weakly. "He's still a federal judge who just tried to shoot an unarmed woman in front of her children," Old Pete interrupted harshly. "Federal judge or not, that's attempted murder, plain and simple." The deputy looked uncertainly between the influential citizens of Clearwater before apparently reaching a decision. "Judge Samuel Winters," he announced formally, "I'm detaining you on suspicion of attempted murder and whatever it's called when you experiment on folks without permission." "Assault and battery," Nathaniel supplied. "Potentially manslaughter for those who died as a result of his procedures." "And those too," the deputy nodded, approaching Winter's horse cautiously. "Sir, I'll need you to dismount and surrender any additional weapons." For a moment, it seemed Winters might attempt further resistance, his face contorted with rage, his good hand twitching toward his boot where another weapon might be concealed. But a glance around the yard revealed only hostile faces, including those of his former associates who had prudently moved to distance themselves from his actions. With a snarl of defeat, Winters allowed himself to be helped from his horse, his injured shoulder clearly causing significant pain. "This isn't over," he hissed as the deputy secured his uninjured arm. "I have connections at the highest levels of government, military patrons who understand the value of my work. You'll never be safe." "Perhaps," Nathaniel acknowledged. "But those same patrons may reconsider their support when they learn how publicly their secret program has been exposed. Trials tend to attract attention, after all. Newspaper coverage, congressional inquiries." Corporal Westfield stepped forward, his expression grim. "I've spent years documenting Winter's experiments and their effects on survivors. Names, dates, procedures. Enough evidence to ensure that any trial will expose everyone involved, right up to the generals who authorized the program." "A bluff," Winters scoffed, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Care to wager your freedom on that?" Westfield countered. "Or would you prefer to negotiate? Your silence for ours? Your agreement to abandon pursuit of the Hayes family in exchange for our discretion regarding certain military connections?" It was a dangerous gambit, offering a clearly unethical man a path to potential freedom. But Nathaniel understood the strategy. They needed Winters neutralized. His pursuit of the children ended permanently. Legal punishment might satisfy justice, but it wouldn't necessarily ensure the family's safety, not if Winters had the powerful connections he claimed. Winters' calculating mind visibly worked through the options, weighing risks against potential gains. After a long moment, he gave a curt nod. I require medical attention first, he said coldly. Then we can discuss terms. Dr. Foster will treat your wound in town, Deputy Williams announced, under guard. Then we'll sort this mess out proper-like. He glanced at Nathaniel. If that suits you, Doc? Nathaniel hesitated, looking to Rebecca. Treating the man who had threatened her family went against every protective instinct. Yet the Hippocratic oath still bound him, even after 6 years of self-imposed exile from medicine. I'll treat him, Nathaniel agreed finally. But Rebecca and the children stay here, under the protection of our neighbors. He glanced gratefully at old Pete and the others who had come to their aid. Don't you worry none about that, the blacksmith assured him, dismounting to stand protectively near Rebecca. Ain't nobody getting near this family till you're back, Doc. As preparations were made to transport the wounded judge to town, Nathaniel took Rebecca aside, the children remaining safely within sight on the porch. Are you certain about this? Rebecca asked anxiously. Going alone with him to town, after everything? I won't be alone, Nathaniel assured her. Half the town will be watching his every move. And treating his wound gives me an opportunity to participate in the negotiations, to ensure that whatever agreement is reached truly protects you and the children. Rebecca's eyes searched his face, worry evident in her expression. What if he refuses any reasonable terms? What if those military connections he mentioned really do intervene? Then we implement the contingency plan, Nathaniel said quietly. The root cellar passage, old Pete's wagon behind the livery. He took her hands in his, squeezing gently. But I don't think it will come to that. Winters is wounded, exposed, his reputation at risk. He's a man who values his position above all else. He'll negotiate to preserve what he can. Be careful, Rebecca whispered, reaching up to touch his face. We've only just found each other. I couldn't bear to lose you now. Nathaniel turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. You won't lose me, he promised. I'll return before nightfall, and we'll face whatever comes next together. Clara appeared at Rebecca's side, slipping her small hand into her mother's. Dear Nathaniel will be fine, she announced with that unnerving certainty. The mountain lady says so. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the wounded madman being loaded into a wagon under the deputy's watchful eye, Nathaniel found himself smiling at the child's confidence. The mountain lady has good judgment, he told Clara solemnly. I'll do my best to prove her right. The journey to town passed in tense silence. Judge Winters slumped in the wagon bed, his wounded shoulder bandaged with a temporary field dressing Nathaniel had applied. Deputy Williams drove the wagon while Nathaniel rode Thunder alongside, his medical bag across his saddle. In Clearwater, a crowd had already gathered, word of the morning's events having spread with the preternatural speed of small-town gossip. Eyes followed the wagon as it rolled toward the doctor's office, a dusty, underused building that had stood mostly vacant since the previous physician's death 2 years earlier. Inside, Nathaniel worked efficiently to clean and properly bandage Winter's wound. The bullet had passed cleanly through muscle without striking bone or major vessels, a remarkably precise shot that reinforced Clara's uncanny abilities. The girl has exceptional talent, Winters commented as Nathaniel finished securing the bandage. Better control than any subject I've observed. How long has she exhibited these abilities? She's not a subject, Nathaniel replied coldly. She's a child. One you'll leave in peace if you have any sense of self-preservation. Winters studied him with clinical detachment. You've grown attached to them. Interesting. I wouldn't have expected the great Dr. Foster to risk his carefully constructed isolation for a widow and her unusual children. There's much you don't understand about human connection, Judge, which perhaps explains your willingness to experiment on people as if they were laboratory animals. Science requires sacrifice, Winters shrugged, then winced as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. You of all people should understand that, doctor. Didn't you experiment with treatments during the typhoid outbreak that claimed your wife and daughter? Treatments that might have saved them if you'd developed them sooner. The barbs struck with precision, suggesting Winters had investigated Nathaniel's past thoroughly. It took considerable restraint not to respond with physical force. There's a difference between ethical medical research and what you did, Nathaniel replied evenly. My patients were fully informed. They consented. They weren't manipulated or coerced. Details, Winters dismissed. The point remains that we both sought to push beyond conventional medical limitations. The difference is merely one of methodology and moral squeamishness. Before Nathaniel could respond to this offensive comparison, the office door opened to admit Corporal Westfield and Mayor Pierce, the latter looking distinctly uncomfortable in the former soldier's presence. "Time to discuss terms," Westfield announced without preamble. "I've drafted a document outlining our proposed agreement." He placed a folded paper on the examination table beside Winters. "Read it carefully, Judge. It represents your best option for maintaining your freedom and reputation." Winters unfolded the document with his good hand, his expression darkening as he read. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Complete abandonment of my research. Relinquishment of all claims to the Hayes children. A sworn statement that Rebecca Hayes is of sound mind and a fit mother." He glared at Westfield. "And in exchange, you merely agree not to expose my military connections or press charges for actions taken during wartime? Inadequate. You forget the attempted murder charge," Nathaniel pointed out coldly. "Witnessed by half the town. That alone would see you imprisoned." "A misunderstanding," Winters attempted. "I was threatened, disoriented by the false accusations." "Save it for a judge who hasn't seen you pull a gun on an unarmed woman," Westfield interrupted. "The terms are fair, considering what you've done. Sign the agreement, and you walk away with your reputation damaged, but intact. Refuse, and I release my documentation to every newspaper from here to Washington." Mayor Pierce cleared his throat nervously. "Judge Winters, as an officer of the court myself, albeit a humble territorial one, I strongly advise accepting these terms. The alternative would be most unfortunate for someone of your standing." Winters' calculating eyes moved from face to face, measuring his options with the same clinical precision he had likely applied to his experiments. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "I require additions," he countered. "The agreement must be mutual. The Hayes family and their advocates, including you, Dr. Foster, will likewise refrain from public accusations against me. And I require copies of your research notes on the children's abilities." "No research notes," Nathaniel stated firmly. "The children are not subjects for study." "But you've documented the girls' unusual perceptions," Winters pressed. "Your journal?" "Will remain private," Nathaniel interrupted. "My observations were made as a physician concerned for a child's well-being, not as a researcher. That distinction matters, Judge. It's the difference between medicine and exploitation." After further negotiation, a revised agreement was drafted. Winters would abandon all legal claims to Joseph and Clara Hayes, acknowledging Rebecca as their sole guardian. He would cease all pursuit or monitoring of the family. In exchange, Westfield would withhold his documentation of Winters' wartime experiments, and the Hayes family would refrain from public accusations about his conduct. As Winters prepared to sign the document, Nathaniel added one final provision. "If any harm comes to Rebecca or the children, any harm from any source that might conceivably be connected to you, this agreement becomes void immediately. Every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence goes to the newspapers, the territorial governor, and the War Department." Winters' lips thinned with displeasure, but he nodded curtly. "Agreed, though the same applies in reverse. Any public mention of my research invalidates the protection extended to Mrs. Hayes and her children." The implication was clear, a mutually assured destruction that would keep both sides honest. With witnesses present, including the deputy and Mayor Pierce, the agreement was signed and copies distributed to all parties. "Our business is concluded then," Winters said, rising stiffly from the examination table. "I'll depart on tomorrow's stage. My associates have already begun arrangements." "We'll verify your departure," Westfield warned, "and maintain watch to ensure you don't attempt contact through intermediaries." With as much dignity as a wounded man could muster, Judge Winters departed, escorted by the deputy to the hotel where he would remain under loose supervision until leaving town. Once he was gone, Nathaniel sagged against the examination table, the tension of the confrontation finally catching up with him. "Will he honor it?" he asked Westfield quietly. The former soldier shrugged. "As much as a man like Winters honors anything, self-interest mostly. He knows we have the power to destroy what he values most, his reputation and position. As long as that threat remains credible, he'll keep his distance." "And the military connections he mentioned?" "Real enough, Westfield acknowledged grimly, but limited in their reach. The war's been over for 12 years. Those who protected him then have less influence now and less inclination to risk exposure for experiments that yielded more madness than military advantage. Mayor Pierce, who had been fidgeting anxiously throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. This unusual situation remains confidential, I trust. For the town's sake? For everyone's sake, Nathaniel agreed. The official story is simply that Judge Winters determined his claim on the Hayes family was legally unsupportable in Montana territory, and he has withdrawn his petition. Excellent, excellent, Pierce nodded vigorously. A civilized resolution. No need for unseemly details about experiments and such. He backed toward the door. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I should inform the town council that the matter has been resolved without further incident. After the mayor's departure, Nathaniel turned to Westfield. What will you do now? Winters knows you're alive. You may not be safe either. Westfield's weathered face showed a weary resignation. I've been watching my back for years, Doc. Won't be much different now. He fingered the worn photograph of the 43rd Massachusetts that had accompanied his letter to Daniel Hayes. Though I admit I'm tired of running, maybe it's time to settle somewhere, now that Winters has been neutralized. You'd be welcome to stay, Nathaniel offered, surprising himself with the sincerity of the invitation. The territory's growing. We could use a man with your particular talents. Westfield laughed, a rusty sound as if long unused. Appreciate that, Doc. Might take you up on it, at least for a spell. He grew serious again. The Hayes children, they'll need guidance, understanding. Their abilities won't disappear with Winter's departure. I know, Nathaniel acknowledged. Clara's connection to whatever presence she perceives on the mountain seems to be growing stronger. And Joseph shows signs of unusual intuitive understanding, particularly with medicinal plants. Inherited modifications to perception, Westfield nodded, different in each subject, but persistent across generations. Winter's one genuine scientific breakthrough, though he never understood its moral cost. He fixed Nathaniel with an intent gaze. Those children need protection, Doc. Not just from Winters, but from a world that won't understand what they can do. Nathaniel hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling him. With Clara, do you think she's truly communicating with Eleanor's spirit? Or is it something else, perhaps accessing memories or impressions somehow preserved in the location? Westfield considered this thoughtfully. The compounds Winters developed were meant to enhance perception beyond normal human limits. Some subjects, like me, developed an ability to read thoughts or intentions. Others gained heightened intuition. A few, like Daniel, seemed to perceive things beyond the veil of death itself. He met Nathaniel's gaze. I believe Clara inherited that specific enhancement from her father, a bridge between worlds that most of us can't cross. So you think Eleanor is actually present, communicating through Clara? I can't claim to understand the metaphysics of it, Westfield admitted, but I've seen enough to know that our perception of reality is far more limited than we imagine. Whether Clara is reaching across some divide to Eleanor's consciousness, or whether all souls leave impressions that only certain minds can detect, does the distinction really matter? The connection is real to Clara, and from what you've described, the information she receives has proven accurate beyond mere coincidence. Nathaniel absorbed this, finding unexpected comfort in the possibility. Eleanor was always the spiritual one between us. She believed firmly that love transcended death. I was the scientist, needing evidence. He smiled faintly. It seems she found a way to provide that evidence after all. They'll have it, Nathaniel promised, for as long as I live. By late afternoon, Nathaniel was finally able to return to the ranch, emotionally and physically exhausted, but triumphant. As thunder crested the final ridge, he saw the familiar buildings below, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney, Joseph visible in the corral with the horses, Clara on the porch with her doll, and Rebecca standing at the gate, watching for his return. She ran to meet him as he dismounted, her face anxious until she read the success in his expression. It's over? She asked, barely daring to hope. It's over, Nathaniel confirmed, pulling her into an embrace regardless of who might be watching. Winters has signed away all claims to the children. He leaves tomorrow. We're safe. Rebecca's body sagged against his in relief, tears dampening his shirt collar. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God and you and James Westfield and everyone who stood with us." They walked together toward the house, Nathaniel leading Thunder with one hand, his other arm around Rebecca's waist. Joseph abandoned his work in the corral to race toward them, and Clara flew off the porch, both children colliding with the adults in a tangle of hugs and excited questions. Did the bad judge go away? Is he really never coming back? Did they put him in jail? Can we stay here forever now? Nathaniel knelt to address them both at eye level, their earnest faces reminding him powerfully of what they had been fighting for. "Judge Winters will leave tomorrow," he explained simply. "He signed a paper promising to leave us alone. We've agreed not to tell anyone about the bad things he did during the war. It's called a compromise." "But he was wicked," Joseph protested. "Shouldn't wicked people be punished?" "Sometimes justice takes different forms," Nathaniel said carefully. "The most important thing was making sure you and Clara are safe, that your mother can raise you in peace, without fear." Clara nodded solemnly. "The mountain lady says it's right. She says sometimes you have to let go of punishing bad people so good people can heal." Rebecca smoothed her daughter's hair, long since accustomed to these uncanny pronouncements. "Your mountain lady is very wise, sweetheart." That evening, after the children were asleep in their new room, truly theirs now, with no threat of separation looming, Nathaniel and Rebecca sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the Montana landscape. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked softly, her head resting against Nathaniel's shoulder. "Whatever we want," he replied, still marveling at the freedom that simple phrase represented. "The ranch needs attention after a winter of neglect. The garden should be planted soon." Joseph's eager to learn more about horses and medicine. "Clara," he smiled, "Clara seems determined to communicate with every spirit on the mountain." Rebecca laughed softly. "And us? What about us, Nathaniel?" He turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had appeared on his porch in a snowstorm and somehow melted 6 years of frozen grief. "I love you," he said simply, the words feeling right despite their relative newness. "You and the children. I want you to stay, not as employees or guests, but as my family, if that's what you want too." Rebecca's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "It is," she whispered. "More than anything." Nathaniel took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that spoke of her strength and determination. "Then marry me, Rebecca Hayes. Be my wife. Let me be a father to Joseph and Clara. Let's build something permanent from what began with a chance encounter in a snowstorm." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, a sense of rightness settled over Nathaniel, a feeling of completion he had never expected to experience again after losing Eleanor and Margaret. Not replacement, for the dead could never be replaced, but renewal, a second chance at life, at family, at joy. Later that night, after Rebecca had returned to the loft for what would be one of her final nights there before moving permanently into Nathaniel's room, he found himself drawn to the hilltop where Eleanor and Margaret were buried. The spring night was clear and cool, the stars impossibly bright above the lonely crosses. "I'm not forgetting you," he said softly to the silent graves. "I'm not replacing you, but I'm living again, Eleanor, the way you wanted me to." The wind sighed through the pines, and for a moment Nathaniel could almost imagine it carried Eleanor's voice. Not in jealousy or reproach, but in benediction. Approval for the life he was choosing to embrace rather than the half-existence he'd endured since her death. Perhaps Clara's mountain lady wasn't merely a manifestation of inherited perception enhancement. Perhaps sometimes the dead did find ways to communicate with the living, through dreams, through children's inexplicable knowledge, through the whisper of wind in pine needles on a Montana hilltop. As Nathaniel turned to descend toward the ranch, toward his future, he glimpsed a small figure standing among the trees, watching him. Clara in her nightgown, her doll clutched against her chest. "What are you doing up here, little one?" he asked gently, approaching her. "You should be asleep." "The mountain lady wanted me to tell you something," Clara replied seriously. "She says thank you for taking care of us, and that she's happy you're going to be our new papa." Nathaniel felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Did the mountain lady tell you her name, Clara?" The little girl nodded. "She says her name is Eleanor, And there's a little girl with her, sometimes named Margaret. Clara tilted her head curiously. Were they your family before? Nathaniel knelt in the pine needles, eye level with this extraordinary child who somehow bridged worlds he couldn't fully comprehend. Yes, he said simply, they were my family before, and they're still important to me, even though they're gone. Clara nodded, accepting this with a child's easy accommodation of complex emotional truths. Eleanor says that's okay. She says there's enough love for everyone, even people who are gone. She yawned suddenly, the lateness of the hour catching up with her. Can we go home now? I'm cold. Of course, Nathaniel lifted her easily into his arms, her small body warm against his chest as she laid her head on his shoulder. Let's go home. As they descended the hill toward the golden light of the ranch house windows, Nathaniel felt a sense of completion unlike anything he'd experienced in years. The room he had built when three strangers appeared on his porch in a snowstorm had become something far more significant than mere shelter. It had become the foundation for a new family, a new beginning. If they snore, I'll build a room, he had said that first morning, gruff and reluctant. They had snored, he had built the room. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel began keeping a new journal, not as a scientist documenting symptoms, but as a father recording the extraordinary gifts of his new children. Joseph's intuitive understanding of healing plants, Clara's conversations with the mountain lady. He came to understand that the abilities the Hayes children possessed transcended simple scientific explanation. They existed in that liminal space between science and faith, between the measurable and the mystical. Winters had inadvertently opened a door through his experiments, never realizing that what flowed through that door was not merely enhanced perception, but something more profound, a connection to dimensions of existence that most humans could never access. Nathaniel, the rationalist who had once required empirical evidence for everything, now found himself guardian to children whose gifts challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. And in that role, he discovered a peace he'd never expected to find again. Science had failed to save Eleanor and Margaret, but it had, through a twisted path, brought him Joseph and Clara and Rebecca. Sometimes when the evening wind whispered through the pines on the mountain, Nathaniel could almost hear Eleanor's laughter. And he no longer questioned whether it was real or simply memory. Some truths transcended proof, and in doing so, Nathaniel Foster had rebuilt himself. 1 year later, on the anniversary of their confrontation with Winters, the Foster family gathered on the hilltop. A new headstone stood beside Eleanor and Margaret's crosses, not marking a death, but celebrating a life. Daniel Hayes, it read, beloved husband, father, and soldier. His sacrifice continues to protect his family. Nathaniel had commissioned it after learning from Westfield that Daniel's body had never received a proper marker in Boston. Rebecca placed wildflowers at its base, finally able to properly mourn the man whose quiet heroism had shaped all their lives. The small medical practice Nathaniel had established in town was thriving. Patients came from 3 counties to see the doctor who combined traditional medicine with the herbal remedies Joseph helped prepare. The boy, now 9, had started formal apprenticeship, his inherited intuition making him unusually gifted. Clara, 7 and dressed in a new pinafore sewn by Agatha Sullivan, who had become an unexpected ally and frequent visitor, sat cross-legged before Eleanor's marker, chatting animatedly about the new foal in the stable and how Joseph was learning to deliver babies. The town's newspaper wants to interview me, Nathaniel told Rebecca as they watched their children from a respectful distance. About the medical clinic. They're calling it a miracle how many lives we've saved this past year. Rebecca squeezed his hand. Would you have believed any of this was possible that morning you found us on your porch? No, he admitted. I was too frozen then, too afraid to let anyone in. And now? He looked at their joined hands, at the simple gold band she wore, at the children who carried whispers of the past while pointing firmly toward the future. Now I understand what Eleanor tried to teach me, that healing isn't just about medicine or science, it's about connection, about letting others in even when it hurts, even when you're afraid. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder. The letter I received yesterday from that medical college in Denver. They want you to lecture there this fall about your typhoid research. Nathaniel stiffened slightly. I haven't practiced real medicine and you practice it every day, she corrected gently. And your work deserves recognition. The treatments you developed, they could save countless lives. Eleanor and Margaret would want that. From where Clara sat, a delighted giggle rose. Margaret says she wants to be a doctor too when she grows up in heaven, she called over her shoulder. Rebecca and Nathaniel exchanged glances, part wonder, part acceptance of the extraordinary gift their daughter possessed. They had learned to trust Clara's pronouncements, no longer questioning their source. As they descended the hill toward home, all four of them together, hands linked, the setting sun painted the ranch in gold. The room Nathaniel had reluctantly built now expanded into a proper wing of the house, with a nursery being prepared for the baby Rebecca carried. Life continued its cycle of loss and renewal. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass, old Pete and Westfield joined them with fiddles. Music drifted across the valley, the same lullaby Eleanor had sung, now played for new ears, new hearts. The past and present merged in perfect harmony, a reminder that love, like music, never truly dies. It just finds new instruments to play through.